Okay, folks, a few reminders this morning. If at all possible, while people are trying to present or have a discussion, if you are not part of that discussion or presentation, if you can keep your cameras on mute, your microphones on mute and your cameras off. That way the recording as well as the interaction goes as smoothly as possible. If at any point in time you do have something that you'd like to add, please feel free to raise your hand or to chime in. We do want to make this as interactive as possible. Especially today, we have quite a few items that we'd like to actively discuss with you and get your information. So welcome and thank you for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started with our occupational licensing update from Shannon Watson in the occupational licensing division. And Shannon, if you are available, I'll go ahead and stop presenting and kick it over to you. My apologies. Let me see if we, Shannon may not be on with us just yet. So we'll go ahead and move on to Mr. Joel Klump with the plan and technical review section for his section update.
Michelle, I think Piero is going to do that, and we've been having trouble getting in. So if you could just give her a minute to register and get in.
Absolutely. No problem. So then I'll go ahead and skip forward to my update and do some quick things that I wanted to talk to you guys about for DWAWG in the first place. So first thing I'd like to be talking to you about today is actually to hopefully have some sort of dialogue with y'all. My apologies for my camera being off. So as you all know, and as the agenda says today, the EPA has come out with the actual effective lead and copper rule revisions, and then they've also announced that there are upcoming lead and copper rule improvements coming. There's a lot that's going to need to go into that. We're going to have to write and adopt our own rules, and we're going to have to be ready to implement that. Not just ourselves as a regulatory entity, but also you as public water systems who are going to need to actually go ahead and comply with those rules. Therefore, we'd really like to have you work as stakeholders with us. We'd like to have some opportunities for you to interact, provide your opinions, provide your information about how this is going to work for you, how this won't work for you, and what kind of specificity we can add to the rules and the guidance to help you succeed. So I wanted to kind of take a moment this morning to pause and discuss how we might want to do that. So there's a couple of options. Obviously, we have this DWAWG format, right? And so because this is a working group, do we want to look at a specific part of the rule and actually have a discussion during these quarterly DWAWG meetings? Or is it something that we want to go ahead and go, okay, not everybody needs to be in. This is a large, not quite as manageable group. Do we want to have a subcommittee specifically to discuss items related to lead and copper rule revisions and the lead and copper rule improvements? I'm very interested to hear what you might be interested in saying about that if you're interested in a subcommittee or using this working group format. So I'm going to go ahead and pause here. And if you have any opinions, please feel free to share them in the chat. Raise your hand. All right, great. Love to see. Oh, sorry. Hand raised and then hand lowered. So let me go ahead and pause and give you all an opportunity to chime in on how you might want to be able to provide your feedback most effectively for the lead and copper rule revisions. Hey, Charlie, I see your hand. Can you go ahead and give us your rundown on what you'd like to see?
Sure. Am I on and can you hear me?
I can hear you and I can see you. Thank you. Very
good. I really appreciate what you just said for myself, and I think for many of the utilities. Our AWWA Water Utility Council had a meeting Friday, and this was the very topic that we discussed and that we were hoping and we're going to encourage TCQ to do. Y'all do is to form a group to work on the lead copper rule revisions. So I'm really pleased to hear you say that. My thoughts, this group is pretty large, very large. My thoughts are you form a stakeholder subgroup, whatever you want to call it, of those that would want to raise their hand and participate in it, see how big that group is and how it might work. I think, I don't think that you'll see everybody on it, but I think, ask for participants and volunteers and form that group and meet I would suggest meet outside of this DWAWG work group and meet on a, some schedule basis or some frequency that helps both y'all and utilities to move through this rule, and the things that we have to do. Obviously, one of the ones, and I know y'all have it on the agenda to talk about it, is the inventory. And that's something that, many utilities are working on, but we need to make sure that what we're doing now, if we've started, is what, will be good for submission, 3 years from now. And those that have not started will have a good idea of what they need to do. So, I very much agree with you in forming this group, and then, getting those that would want to participate to be involved in it and meet, on some frequency or basis. So I'll end my comments there and let you proceed forward.
All right. Thank you, Charlie. I really appreciate you chiming in. I do see quite a few people in the chat are also interested in the possibility of a subcommittee. Is there anyone who would like to add their 2 cents about what they'd like to see from a subcommittee or anything like that? Or I'd like to put this out there as well. Should we come forward and do some sort of follow-up to this with potentially a survey to see who might be interested in participating and potentially how they'd like to do that? Is it a Teams function? Is it an in-person function? Is it on what frequency? Stacy, I go ahead and see your hand up. Would you like to share with us as well?
Yes, good morning. I just want to ditto what Charlie said. I agree with the subcommittee. I think it would be best in the format, and also because there's so many moving parts to that lead and copper rule, and different utilities may have a different perspective, but also we can learn from each other as to how we can move forward with a lot of the information.
Thank you. I totally agree. I know that this is a format we'd like to get you guys to be able to talk back and forth more. So if you have any more suggestions about how we can move forward to get the water system speaking to each other and learning from each other, you guys are a wealth of knowledge, and we don't want to just silo that knowledge out there. Gary, I see you're also on and potentially wanting to share. Would you like to speak?
Hey, good morning, Michelle. Good morning, everyone. I apologize for my voice. Cedar is definitely taking its toll on me. So apologies, but I just want to echo Charlie and Stacy, and I won't repeat what they said, but in total full 100% agreement. I will just share some feedback that I'll go out on a limb and say some specificity and working together and tracking together on what is going to be needed come deadline time for the lead service line inventory. As far as I read it, and I don't want to take away from your presenters later, Michelle, because I know we're again at the top of the meeting here. But as far as I read it, the lead service line inventory, as well as the sampling for schools and childcare facilities, those things don't seem to be impacted by this new rule that's going to be created down the road. So I'd like to, from a personal opinion, I'll give you feedback that I'd like to start on those 2 items, particularly the lead service line inventory. Thanks for the opportunity, Michelle.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for sharing. We really appreciate it. And totally understand what you're going for, and same type of thing. We're just trying to figure out what is sitting in front of us and how to get it done. And as you guys can tell from what's been read into the Federal Register and what we are all working off of, that's the take-home message. We're all working off of the exact same thing. And at this point in time, there are quite a few questions. So for us to work together through it would be a benefit to all of us. And yes, lead service line inventory and schools are taken down as notes as great places to start. So I saw quite a few comments there. I think that they are also talking about the potential for a survey. So we'll go ahead and follow that up to make sure that everybody has the ability to get their say out there. I'd also like to take this opportunity to talk about the future of Dwog. So as I mentioned, we really do want this to be a format where you guys can interact with each other more fluidly. You can share those ideas. You can share what's worked for you, what hasn't worked for you, save each other time, save each other energies. So I wanted to take a moment to discuss, what does the future of Dwog look like? What works for you? What doesn't work for you? We've been in a situation for about 2 years now that we've been doing Dwog via Teams. And we've had some pretty good success from a perspective of more people attending, but there may be less interaction. With potentially the move back to more of a in-person office type of atmosphere, there is the opportunity to return to an in-person Dwog. And then there's the opportunity to offer a hybrid Dwog where you could attend through Teams and have that live, chat in capability, but there are the option to show up in person and actually have that networking capability and also the just sit down conversations. So once again, I want to pause and ask you guys how you're feeling about that. Do you feel like it's time to go back to in person whenever it's safe? Would you like to have the in-person option, but really have that Teams pull-in capability where we can go hybrid? Or is it great to just keep it on Teams and never have to travel again? So once again, going to pause for a moment and see what people have to say. Bill, would you like to go ahead and share your opinion on the matter?
Yeah, I like the hybrid approach because not all the time can people or I can make it down to Austin, but I do think in-person meetings are a little bit better in that you can feel more comfortable to speak. Here you have to, on a Teams meeting, you got to raise your hand and wait, and there's not as much, I don't think, as much back and forth. But I think a hybrid would be best because, as you say, people have to have tight travel budgets and not everybody can drive to Austin. And some people, it's a long drive to get to Austin.
Thank you for sharing that. You mentioned the need to potentially raise your hand and wait to be called on. Is that something we had done to try and make sure that everybody could hear and to make sure that everyone was able to be, caught and posted for YouTube? But is this something that is actually pulling away from the meetings? Should we just let y'all chime in at any point in time? Do you think that would take away?
No, because you have too many people overriding and only one person can speak at a time. So I think the hands works, but I don't know if there's a better way.
Okay, understood. Bill's was the only hand I saw on that. Does anybody else excuse me, anybody else have something they'd want to share about the format potentially, other than I see a few in the chat? Okay. Like I said, I see quite a few people interested in a hybrid structure in the future. So we'll keep that in mind as we move forward. Our next scheduled WAWG would be in April. So we can go ahead and keep that in mind, obviously, depending on what the future brings, since none of us know that information. But I also wanted to talk to you not just about the format of DWAWG, but potentially the functionality of DWAWG. So as I mentioned, we really want you guys to interact a little bit more. And as I was talking with Bill, like, should we raise hands? Should we not raise hands? Should we have the ability to talk back and forth more readily than we currently do? And also, when we were in the agenda room, there was a lot of, us being over here with microphones and y'all being out in the chairs and having to, raise your hand for a microphone. We'd like to have more fluidity. So I kind of wanted to touch base with y'all and see what things you find value in DWAWG and what things you could really do without. So we usually start the DWAWGs with the program updates. Do those add value to you? Are those something that you're interested in? Do you want to know the licensing passing rates? Do you want to know what's going on with TWIC and with the sections? If you have anything to say about program updates, please feel free to let me know. Also wanted to ask how you feel about presentations. We try to be appropriate to the time. We try to be aware of what's going on. Is it CCR season? Is it a brand new rule has just come out and we need to talk about it? But is that right? Is that what you guys are wanting to see, or is our presentations really taking away where it's just us talking to you and you don't get that interactive capability? So I'm interested to see if there's anything from the perspective of presentations. Would you like to see more of them? Would you like to see less of them? Would you like to see a presentation that has discussion built in? So let me go ahead and pause there and see if anybody has a feedback on presentations. Okay. Oh, good. I do see a hand. 1 second. Carrie Michelle, sorry, go ahead.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Carrie Michelle Kyle. I'm the Deputy Director of the Water Supply Division. I just asked Michelle to kind of talk a little bit as we're going into the new year about some format changes. And one of the things I'd really like to see is getting more feedback for y'all, especially coming in on the implementation of the lead and copper rule. You know, we're just as confused as all of you are on some of those issues from EPA right now and kind of what's going on and how that's all going to work. And we'll talk a little bit about that today. I want to make sure that we are giving you guys a forum where you can give us clear communication. We can give you that communication, and then you guys have a feed and what you need and how we can help you accomplish that. I am a little concerned. I don't want to start making a bunch of decisions in the dark without getting feedback and looking at it from your all's perspective, because we're all going to have to work really closely together to get this done, because it's going to be a little weird for a few years until we kind of get our feet wet here. So I'd really like, again, as Michelle was talking about, establishing a forum where we can really get y'all's feedback and get you integrated into the process so that, we're not killing you because we're doing something that works for us but doesn't work for you. And so, if this is the forum to do that, or we can establish some subcommittees, or we can, think about other ways to get comments back from you all. One of the concerns I've always had in that agenda room is that, I love discussion and engaging in discussion, and I'm hoping to get that a little bit more. Sometimes the agenda room doesn't really parlay into having a discussion type forum. It's us making a presentation or giving a discussion without really hearing a lot back from y'all. So I think that's what I'm really interested in, is hearing about, what you all have to say and how we can get you into our process to hear and design things that are going to work for you and us. And that's really all I wanted to say. It's good that you all are here. I like the fact we've got a lot more people that have come and listened to this. And so I think having a hybrid situation is really great, because travel isn't always possible for everybody.
Thank you, Carrie Michelle. And thank you to all of you who participated in the chat and raising your hand and speaking out. I really appreciate it. We'll go ahead and take what you've commented here, and it looks like people do want a survey. So we'll be following up with a survey through the DWAWG email to the best of our ability to try and get some feedback from you guys and know how to move forward with DWAWG in a way that works well for you and works well for us. So without further ado, I'll move on to some really hopefully short and sweet updates from the standard section. I would like to, as I mentioned, we do have that lab stakeholder group that's coming up this afternoon. And I would encourage anyone who interacts with the lab, especially related to the lead and copper rule, to attend that. But one item I wanted to bring to everyone's attention is ensure that your lab has and maintains accreditation. So we have laboratories that work through the TCEQ's other section of the monitoring division to become accredited. But it's like getting a driver's license. It can get taken away just the same. So whenever you've been doing business with someone, it's good to check up on a regular basis, preferably before every time you submit samples, to make sure that they still have an active accreditation. We do try to be up to date as best as we can on our website about which ones are accredited, but at any point in time, they should be able to provide to you their certificate of accreditation with the issuance date and the expiration date. So unfortunately, we've run into some folks doing business with labs that are not accredited or no longer accredited. So word to the wise, the more you know, please ensure that your lab has and maintains accreditation, and not just overall, but for the specific thing you're asking them to do business with you on. Jessica, who is our quality assurance specialist, has just entered into the chat the link to our environmental laboratory accreditation program, and that's also where you can find the links of the list of up-to-date laboratories, as well as our lab maps that we maintain on our website. And then I also want to remind you that for any samples that you guys collect, so don't worry about the chem samples that we collect, we ship those to your lab and all that kind of stuff. But for the samples that you collect, the lead and copper rule, the water quality parameters, the BAC-Ts, you can choose whatever accredited lab you want. You are their customer, so they should give you customer service. Build a relationship, have a relationship, and vote with your dollars. If you're not getting the service that you'd like, choose someone else. For bacteriological samples, we have about 100 labs you can choose from. A lot of those will take them through the mail, so even if you're not locally related, closely associated and available to those, you can still do business with them. And then, of course, there's dozens, I think it's 30-something now, of options when it comes to the water quality parameter and lead and copper rule tap samples. So please, do your homework, choose wisely. Just like you wouldn't hire an operator that you don't trust and isn't licensed, make sure that you're doing business with laboratories that you trust and are properly accredited. Also wanted to follow up from our previous DWAWG in, I guess it was October at this point in time, to let you guys know that we feel like the E2 reporting situation related to the DLQRs has been remedied. So thank you for holding with us. We had a very trying quarter in October, but reporting for January, or for last quarter, closing by January the 10th, appears to have gone really well. And we've had significantly fewer reports of service errors. And the ones we have generally been access errors. So thank you very much. However, if you did experience errors and you did not report that to us, please let us know so we can have an accurate understanding of what's going on. And then just one item for word to the wise. If you are a system who has to comply with the revised total coliform rule, which is every system, there is a possibility that in the future you could trigger a level 1 assessment. And I just want to let you know that we have gone through, and now that the rule's been in service for quite a few years, we've tried to make some improvements to the level 1 assessment form to make it easier to fill out the questions that were a little bit confusing, to clarify those, and then also just to make it much more uniform and accessible, where more people can download it, more people can use it, especially because right now a lot of people are just doing things electronically and sending it in via email. So if you were to trigger a level 1 assessment from this point forward, we'll be providing you with the new form. And if you're someone who wants to have that on hand at any time, that new form is also now available online, and you can download it at your convenience. If you have any questions or feedback about that form, please feel free to make sure that you let us know, and we'll be as receptive to that feedback as possible. All right, so my apologies for going out of order, but I'd like to have a chance to go back and allow Vera to chime in and provide the updates for Joel's PTRS group. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is healthy and warm. I had a little bit of difficulty joining this morning. Joel Klump is the section manager of the Plan and Technical Review section. He could not be here this morning. I am if you do not know me, I am the team leader for the plan review team. Our regular work continues on exceptions and plans. If you have any questions about that, I encourage you to contact Joel or myself or Stephanie Escobar, the team leader for the Technical Review and Oversight team. Or you can just email our email box. We do get a lot of questions there, but I still find that a lot of people don't know about it. You can email questions, it's to the email box or submittals also. It's ptrs@tceq.texas.gov. And as I said, you know, our regular work continues, although we are working like everyone else. It's all about getting ready for the revised lead and copper rule. And so that's the newest thing in our section is the division was blessed to acquire new positions to do this work, and including on the plan and technical review side. And so we added a new team. It's called the Corrosion Control and Disinfection Protocol Team. It is going to handle the work related to lead and copper rule revisions and also CT studies. So we are going to have several vacant positions posted, and most of them are, in fact, all of them are all engineering positions. And so if we have any engineers that are interested in seeing what state work is like, it's really good. For those of you who know me, I've been here a really long time. So if we have any engineers, I encourage you to apply for those positions or any current positions that are actually posted right now. If you're interested, let us know, or just look at our web page under the jobs link. And that's all that I have, Michelle.
All right, thank you very much, Vera. Let me go ahead and kick it over to the next item on our agenda, which is Mr. Steven Swarenga with the Drinking Water Special Function section and their associated updates.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm going to turn my camera on briefly, and then I'm going to share screen. Hello, everybody. How are you all doing? I'm going to share my screen here a quick minute with information about our courtesy reminder system. You can see that. I would encourage you guys to enroll yourselves in this in your systems. Lots of great information coming through there, and you know, always looking to update it with additional messages going out. And so it's a great place to stay tuned in. I also just wanted to very quickly remind folks that the PHS fees were due. It's the public health service fees were due on December 30th. So if you have not paid those, to please follow through on that and get those fees paid. If you've got any questions about that, please contact Terry Cisneros or call our general telephone number, which is 512-239-4691, and we'll get you connected to the right folks to help you with that. We also just sent out the reminder postcards for the 2021 regulatory assessment fee, and those are due by the end of this month, January 30th. And so, again, if you've got any questions related to that, please follow up with Terry Cisneros or Jackie Saldana, who's the team leader for the Drinking Water Inventory and Protection Team. Also, just wanted to remind you guys, or actually make you aware, that we've put the PDW 2021 PDW conference proceedings on our YouTube channel, and we encourage you all to reference that and share that with your staff. It's great opportunities for learning. There's always golden nuggets in there, and so we encourage you guys to have a look at those. And it's also a great opportunity to connect with the folks that are doing the things that you have questions about. And so it's a great kind of first step resource for y'all. So those are all the updates that I have. So I'll stop sharing my screen here, and I will turn it back over to you, Michelle, unless there are any questions for me.
All right. Thank you, Stephen.
Right, thank you.
As always, if you have questions, feel free to throw them up at any point in time. We'll get them to the appropriate person, and we will be glad to talk them over with you. As Vera mentioned, there has been some restructuring in the division to account for new items added to our plate of work to do. And as part of that, there is now a new section, the Emergency Preparedness and Response section. And in order to give their update, this is their new section manager, Brittany Wortham-Teakle. Hey, Britt.
Good morning, everybody. As she just mentioned, we are a new section in response to a wave of new positions. The division was provided in response to new rules that we have to implement. I am the new section manager. My name is Brittany Wortham-Teakle, and Leticia De Leon is going to be helping me at the section level as the technical specialist, who is still handling some Homeland Security and many emergency functions for the Water Supply Division. A little bit more information about the new section. The section has two teams. The one is the Texas Optimization and Response Team. The team leader for that is Brian Matthews. And all of the folks that you know from TOP and the Cross Connection programs are currently in that team. We also have the Resiliency and Preparedness team, and there is no current team leader right now. And this team has the Receivership Coordination, Financial, Managerial, and Technical Assistance program, and the Emergency Preparedness Plan program. So we do have a bunch of new staff. So the staff we have currently to review emergency preparedness plans, I want to provide their names for everyone just in case you see emails from them. So we have Adriana Thomas, she's going to be our work leader, and Erin Kemp Poole, Kendall Adair, Laura Jardine, Knowledge Off, Nancy Benavides, and Taylor Nickel. These are our current EPP staff, and they will be the ones reviewing the plans that you all submit. And here's a little bit of information about EPPs, just as a reminder. Please submit your EPP by March 1, 2022. And there is the availability of an extension for 90 days for the submittal or the implementation deadline. Cannot be both. There is a template available on our webpage. You can search for emergency preparedness plans on the homepage, but I'll also put a link in the chat for everybody for reference. There is an updated template posted on our webpage on December 3rd. If you have already completed and submitted your EPP on the form dated August 2021, there is no need to redo your EPP and resubmit. Just please remember, after receiving the letter approving your EPP, an approved copy of the EPP must also be filed with your local county judge's office or county office of emergency management, the Texas Division of Emergency Management, and the Public Utility Commission. The addresses for those are provided in the EPP. We have started receiving some EPPs. I think we've only received about 100. So you don't have to wait until March 1st. You can submit them whenever you're ready. Although I know for a lot of water systems, this is a relatively new program, this is a new program, and there may be a lot of questions about how to complete and submit it. So we do have FMT assistance available if you need help completing your EPP or assistance with filing a waiver. And there is a financial waiver option for many systems if the cost is pretty significant. That will be passed to your customers. Assistance can be provided via direct visit, email, or phone. And if you want to request assistance for completing your EPP, you can send that to fmt@tceq.texas.gov. And for additional information about our EPPs, again, please visit our webpage. So Dorothy was going to be here to provide an update on TWIC, but she had something come up and now she's unavailable. So she provided some information to me to share with you today. But if you have any specific questions, please reach out to Dorothy directly. So if you're unaware of what TWIC is, it's the Texas Water Infrastructure Coordination Committee. It's an umbrella organization designed to help water and wastewater systems identify sources of funding and other assistance. TWIC members include state and federal funding and regulatory agencies, as well as assistance providers and trade organizations. Entities interested in finding funding and other assistance are welcome to attend TWIC meetings. And the next meeting will be Thursday, January 20th. It's a virtual meeting hosted by the Texas section of AWWA. And please contact Dorothy Young if you would like to be added to the agenda to discuss funding or other assistance. And you can contact her at dorothy.young@tceq.texas.gov. So the Texas Water Development Board is inviting entities to submit information on projects to be included on the upcoming fiscal year state revolving fund programs intended use plans. To be included in the initial project priority list for state fiscal year 2023, entities must submit completed project information form through the online application or by completing and submitting the Microsoft Word versions. Project information forms must be received by midnight March 4th. And so just to circle back to the EPP program, there will be a discussion a little bit later on frequently asked questions and frequently noted errors in the forms that we have reviewed so far. So just stay tuned for a little bit more specific information on EPPs and the information required to be on that form. But that's all I have for my section this time, and I hope everybody is staying warm and healthy out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Brittany. We appreciate the update. That should bring us up to the presentation portion of our meeting today. I do want to preface this by saying, please understand that these are presentations with the intent of discussing. As we've said several times today, it's important for us to know how this is potentially impacting you, how you see it and how you read it, because sometimes we don't all see and read the same thing in the same way. So the first presentation is going to be coming from Laura Higgins. She's going to be talking about the lead and copper rule revisions, the nitty gritty of kind of what it says, and then moving on from there. And I believe she has a few places where she'd like you guys to kind of chime in and share what that means for you. So without further ado, Laura, let me go ahead and pass it over to you. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. All right, let me see if I can share my screen here. Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Laura Higgins, and I'm the team leader for the Lead and Copper Monitoring Team here at the TCEQ. Today, I'd like to give a general overview of the lead and copper rule revisions that came effective December 16th of 2021. Before I begin, I just want to preface that while the effective date of the lead and copper rule revisions is December 16th of 2021, the compliance date, or the date that water systems are expected to comply, is not until October 16th of 2024. All right, so what I'd like to do is give a brief background on the lead and copper rule, or the LCR, and then discuss EPA's intent to strengthen the lead and copper rule before then going over some of the details of the lead and copper rule revisions, or the LCRR. And then finally, I'd like to talk next steps. Originally published in 1991, the lead and copper rule applies to approximately 68,000 community and non-transient, non-community public water systems serving over 300 million people nationwide. And in Texas specifically, there's approximately 5,500 public water systems that are subject to the lead and copper rule regulation. The lead and copper rule is a treatment technique regulation rather than an MCL, and it requires water systems to take action to reduce exposure to the extent feasible. Lead is generally not naturally found in Texas source waters. Rather, lead from lead pipes, faucets, and fixtures can dissolve into water or sometimes can enter as particles. So in order to keep lead and copper from entering the water, the lead and copper rule requires some systems to treat water using certain chemicals that keep the lead and copper in place by reducing corrosion. When corrosion control alone is not sufficient to control lead exposure, systems are required to educate the public about risks of lead in drinking water and to replace lead service lines. So in order to protect all Americans from lead in drinking water, and with President Biden's vision to remove 100% of lead service lines, the EPA announced that during their executive order directed review of the lead and copper rule revisions, there were many areas for improvement. On December 16th of 2021, the EPA announced next steps to strengthen the regulatory framework on lead in drinking water, which includes a two-prong approach. Firstly, the EPA announced in a Federal Register notice that the Lcrr, as published in January of 2021, will go into effect on December 16th of 2021 to support near-term development of actions to reduce lead in drinking water. And as I mentioned at the start of this presentation, the compliance date for the Lcrr is not until October 16th of 2024. And secondly, the EPA will develop a new proposed rulemaking known as the Lead and Copper Rule Improvements, or the LCRI, to strengthen key elements of the rule, such as replacing all lead service lines, compliance tap sampling, action and trigger levels, and prioritizing historically underserved communities. So, when it was developed, the goal of the Lcrr was to build off of the current lead and copper rule and to strengthen it in order to better protect children and our communities. The three main aims in the Lcrr are: 1, get the lead out of our nation's drinking water, including improvements to lead service line replacement. 2, empower communities through information so that consumers can take steps to reduce their lead exposure. And 3, better protect children at schools and childcare facilities. And as I stated previously, the LCRI will expand on these aims, so know that some specifics could change, but for now, I think it's important to know what's in the LCRR so that we can see where we're headed and start planning for the future. All right, so the primary goal is to get the lead out of our nation's drinking water. So under the Lcrr, systems will be required to adjust sampling sites to better target locations with lead service lines. Specifically, with the Lcrr, the tap sample site tiering criteria has been revised to emphasize sampling from lead service line sites. The new tiering also recategorizes copper pipe with lead solder sites regardless of their age. Additionally, the way that samples are used to calculate the 90th percentile has changed. For systems with lead service lines, 100% of lead service line taps must be sampled, and all lead service line sample results must be used to calculate the 90th percentile for lead. Any additional sites beyond the required minimum will not be included when tiered sites are available. Systems will also be required to follow new tap sampling procedures and collect water in contact with lead service lines. For all lead service line sites, the 5th liter must now be collected. And additionally, systems will now be prohibited from including instructions to remove and clean aerators or to conduct pre-stagnation flushing prior to the start of the required stagnation period. And finally, systems with higher levels will sample more frequently. The Lcrr introduces a trigger level in addition to the action level, and systems above the trigger level but below the action level must monitor at least annually and are not eligible for reduced triennial monitoring. Systems above the action level must monitor every 6 months with results at or below the action level for 2 years. So based on sampling results, systems with elevated lead levels will reevaluate their existing corrosion control treatment or conduct a treatment study so that they are prepared to respond quickly when necessary. Systems will have to pay attention to individual locations with elevated levels of lead by identifying the cause and mitigating the problem. This is called the find and fix approach. Also, it's important to highlight that there's flexibility for small systems so that they can protect public health by taking action that makes sense for their community. The small system flexibility would apply to all non-transient, non-community systems and all community systems serving 10,000 or fewer people. And compliance alternatives for these systems include full lead service line replacement, all lead service lines within 15 years, installation and maintenance of optimized corrosion control treatment, installation and maintenance of point of use devices, and replacement of all lead-bearing plumbing fixtures at every tap where water could be used for human consumption. It's key to point out that some of these options, such as the point of use devices, could have a limited applicability due to the need for 100% participation and access. So overall, small systems that exceed the lead trigger level will be required to recommend a compliance option and obtain approval. And then if a system subsequently exceeds the lead action level, it must implement the approved option. The final feature of this first aim is the focus on replacing more lead service lines. But before I go on, I just want to take the time to go over the definition of a lead service line. So the Lcrr defines a lead service line as a portion of pipe that is made of lead which connects the water main to the building inlet. A lead service line may be owned by the water system, owned by the property owner, or both. For the purposes of this subpart, a galvanized service line is considered a lead service line if it ever was or is currently downstream of any lead service line or service line of unknown material. If the only lead piping serving the house is a lead gooseneck, pigtail, or connector, and it is not a galvanized service line that is considered a lead service line, the service line is not considered a lead service line. And for the purposes of 141.86A only, a galvanized service line is not considered a lead service line. We're still in the planning stages for a number of things related to the Lcrr, so if this definition raises concerns for you, please feel free to reach out. We'd love to get your feedback. So with the focus on replacing more lead service lines, the EPA will for the first time require systems to develop a public lead service line inventory and create a plan for removing all lead service lines. Again, the Lcrr outlines a new trigger level in addition to the action level. So systems above the trigger level of 10 parts per billion are required to work with the TCEQ to set an annual goal for replacing lead service lines. And water systems above the action level of 15 parts per billion are required to fully replace a minimum of 3% of the number of known or potential lead service lines annually. It's also important to note that the Lcrr will prohibit testing out to avoid replacing lead service lines. We're going to wait until the development of the LCRI to discuss the trigger level and the development of replacement plans any further. But the important thing to take away from this is the emphasis on removing lead service lines, not just controlling corrosion. And in order to do that, water systems need to start creating lead service line inventories. With the second aim of empowering communities, homeowners will learn about elevated levels of lead in their home or system sooner. Systems will be required to conduct public notification to consumers within 24 hours of being notified of a 90th percentile lead action level exceedance. And additionally, systems must provide notice to customers whose individual tap sample is greater than 15 micrograms per liter within 3 days. They will also understand where lead service lines are in their community and how to protect their family from exposure to lead in drinking water. Water systems will also notify homeowners and building owners about opportunities to replace lead service lines, including information about financial assistance programs. And finally, the third aim is to better protect children at schools and childcare facilities. And to define some of these terms, childcare facility means a location that houses a licensed provider of childcare, daycare, or early learning services to children, as determined by the state, local, or tribal licensing agent. A school means any building or buildings associated with public, private, or charter institutions that primarily provides teaching and learning for elementary or secondary students. And an elementary school means a school classified as elementary by state and local practice and is composed of any span of grades, including preschool, but not above grade 8. Again, we're still in the planning stages for a number of things related to LCRR. So if these definitions, again, raise concerns, please feel free to reach out. We'd really love to get your feedback.
Laura, if you wouldn't mind pausing after goal 3, we have some questions in the chat, and I'd like to, before they get too old, have a chance to respond to them.
Okay, do you want me to continue with goal 3 and just pause before I get to the next steps?
Yeah, that'd be great if you don't mind.
Sure, will do. Okay, so with this final aim, community systems will now be required to test at elementary schools and child care facilities. So systems will be required to develop a list of customers or customer service connections that provide water to schools or licensed child care providers, and then testing must be conducted at these facilities over a 5-year period, testing 20% of facilities each year. This testing will be in accordance with the EPA's 3 T's approach for reducing lead in drinking water in schools and child care facilities, and the results will be provided to the sampled facility, the TCEQ, and the state and local health departments. The system will additionally certify annually that it met all notification and sampling requirements. And then after sampling, schools and child care facilities will be more likely to implement a comprehensive testing program. After 5 years, they will continue to receive annual outreach, and they'll have the opportunity to be tested for lead by the system on request. And additionally, secondary schools can request testing at any time. Okay, so I'll pause right now before we get into next steps. Michelle, you said there are some questions.
Yeah, we just have a few, and I didn't want them to get too far buried.
Sure.
So one of the first question I see related to lead and copper that hadn't been addressed already was from SAWS, related to the 5th liter sampling. Specifically, they ask, for the 5th liter sampling, how would this feasibly be completed? Will the homeowner be asked to collect 5 liters of water? We have enough trouble getting them to fill 1 liter. Could you honestly expect them to fill 5 liters? Great question. We are still waiting on guidance from the EPA, just because it's as unclear to us as it is to you. And this is also something we'd like to discuss in our own stakeholder meetings, about how we should direct people to do these things, if that is the expectation, what is most likely for success, all of those types of things. So I'd be very interested to potentially have someone from SAWS join in to discuss that with us as we move forward. For now, I don't have a definitive answer for you, because that is a question we also posed to the EPA in our commentary on the rule. So I apologize we don't have an answer, but just like you, we're waiting on additional guidance from the EPA. Let's see. There's also the 2 questions related to reduced monitoring, I believe. So Shane asked, will current reduced monitoring approval carry over to the LCRR, or will it be reestablished after testing new sample tiers? And then Joni asked, oh, well, we'll start with that one. So Laura, would you like to field this one, or would you like me to take it?
Well, feel free to jump in anytime, Michelle, but I believe the requirements for reduced will be the same, but there will be more, I guess there's more caveats added onto that. So with whether or not we have a trigger level, or some of these extra things as outlined in the LCRR, when we get to the LCRI, it'll kind of determine if there are different scenarios that would take you out of eligibility for reduced monitoring. So I think the criteria for reduced is the same. There's just more caveats that could kick you out of reduced monitoring.
Right, and the only thing I would add is, like you said, about establishing new testing tiers. It is possible that through your inventory, you will find sites that need to be tested that were not previously in your pool, and that could affect your ability to meet those trigger or action levels. So there is a likelihood that some people on reduced will no longer be eligible, but it'll be based on the eligibility requirements in the rule.
Right.
The other item that I'd like to just kind of jump to is Joni's question of if we will be doing a second round of 6-month sampling, for instance, January through June of 22, are we required to follow the LCRR definitions and requirements? I'd like to pause here and say very specifically that although the rule is effective, that means it is written into statute, it is not needing to be complied with until the compliance deadline. So there is no need for anyone to comply. You can work towards compliance, but there's no need to comply with anything in the LCRR until that compliance deadline of October the 16th of 2024. From this moment until that moment, the rule in effect is what you see in the Texas Administrative Code, and that is what you should be actually complying with in the meantime. I hope that was clear enough. Sorry, go ahead, Laura.
Yeah. Oh, that's actually on my next slide. That was that's great. Were there any other questions?
There was one about testing out. I assume that they meant, well, Saz, I might have to ask you, what was the context of the testing out? And while Saz might have a moment to type this in, there was the question about when will testing start for schools, and same question there is related to the fact that compliance won't start until the compliance deadline. Saz, I see you have your hand up if you'd like to clarify.
Yes, ma'am. Michelle, a comment was made a second ago regarding testing out, and we were wanting clarification. Did that mean the service line sampling, let's say 10-liter sampling, to test out of ones that are potentially made of unknown material?
I think that, Laura, let me double check, but I think that the testing out here was related to potentially small system cessation, and then also the practice of sampling more than your minimum required amount in order to effectively reduce your 90th percentile. Is that what you were talking about, Laura?
Yes, that's correct. So the way there's new caveats in the calculation for the 90th percentile that prohibit you from potentially sampling more than the required amount in order to change that 90th percentile calculation.
Okay. The next one I saw on here was what is the applicability of the rule towards childcare facilities located within a non-community system? So that is what we see currently as a loophole. Is that correct, Laura?
Yes. Currently the LCRR talks about testing at childcare and childcare facilities and schools as only specific to community systems. So we'll see if that part changes with the LCRI, but as it's written currently, it's only for community systems.
Okay, so the next one is if a school or child care facility opts out, does the PWS get credit for that facility?
If a school opts out of testing after they've been sampled? I'm not sure I understand the question.
And Deer Park, please tell me if I'm wrong, but I think you mean if you have to do 20% per year, you go to this facility and they refuse, does that count against you for them to refuse? If that's the question, then the answer is we're a little unclear based on the rule, but it does in a lot of opportunities allow you to document specifically the good faith efforts made to accomplish that sampling, and that could be something that credits your public water system with the facility. We'll obviously be waiting for additional EPA guidance on that, but because it does discuss the ability to document refusal, it's possible that will be the case moving forward.
Right.
And that was the question, so thank you.
Okay, fantastic.
Great question.
Let's see. Sorry, Laura, I lost my place making sure who raised their hand.
Thank you.
Charlie asked, do you see all systems that have lead service lines developing a replacement plan, even if they are below the trigger and action levels? Charlie, that's a great question. We don't know what's going to be in the LCRI any more than anyone else does. However, EPA was very specific that the things they saw moving forward were the inventory and were higher levels of replacement, but what that means for the plan, I cannot tell you. Laura, did you have any more specific than that?
No, I mean, I can speak a little bit to, what is outlined for the plans in the LCRR, but just like you said, Michelle, that is subject to change with the LCRI. So we're all kind of waiting to see if we get more guidance on what they plan for that.
Now, Charlie, just as an FYI, as the rule is currently written, every single system that has a single lead service line still has to have a plan in case they were to trigger the action level or the triggered level, so that it's already in the wings, ready to go. So correct. Yes, as currently written, anyone who finds even a single lead, anything that falls into the not lead, so you can't be 100% lead free.
Yes.
They're the only ones who wouldn't have to do a lead replacement plan at this point in time as written in the rule.
Right. So even if you are lead status unknown, those folks will still also be required to make a replacement plan as currently written in the LCRR.
Deer Park asked again about secondary schools requesting testing, and is this the PWS cost, a school cost, or any update on the WIN grant? So we can start with secondary schools requesting testing. The rule itself never discusses who pays for what. So the fact of the matter is the PWS has to offer it. Whether that means that they pay for it or whether the school pays for it is something that we are waiting for additional guidance on. I would say that that's something that you'd have to think forward on your program and what that means. As we move forward, there may be funding opportunities. And then on the WIN grant is currently only for voluntary sampling, and that's something that you could refer them to basically right now. So if they're interested in testing, just send them to the WIN grant now. It's before LCRR, it's voluntary, and it will cost them nothing because it is covered by the grant. So in this interim period, I would highly encourage you to reach out to any primary or secondary schools, especially secondary schools, who may not be covered by this rule in the future except for requested testing, and have them reach out to our lead testing in schools and childcare program. When we go back to the presentation here in a bit, I will add the information for that program into the chat. The people who are asking about reduced, I just want to let you know that for now, whatever you're scheduled for, you keep moving on. As I mentioned earlier, the need to comply with the lead and copper rule revisions does not happen all the way until October of 2024. So for now, your goal right now is to comply with the existing rule. Just keep going with the rule as written, as scheduled. Let's see, I think we talked about opting out. How often are you getting guidance from the EPA? The answer is currently we are not. They say it is forthcoming. That is what was written in the Federal Register. We will obviously keep you informed as we get anything, if we get anything. Are schools required to test? Are systems required to test schools and childcare facilities after the 5-year requirement? Laura, I don't know if you wanted to answer that. Sorry, go ahead.
That'll just be on a voluntary basis.
Correct. So there's that one 5-year cycle at the beginning where everyone has to be tested, and then after that, it would be as required. Crystal, I hope that you saw this information here, but if you are the question was, can systems begin doing some testing prior to the compliance date and reduce the number of schools over the 5-year period? For instance, we can sample 20 schools this year and reduce the number we need to do within the 5-year period. So the answer is no, not really, because the compliance date doesn't start until 2024. Any sampling taken prior to that is non-compliant sampling, so it would not count towards your rules. It's obviously something that we'd encourage, and we'd encourage you to work with your systems to do through the voluntary WIN program and get them knowing what's going on with their water. But as far as rule compliance, no, that based on our current reading of the rule would not count towards that 5-year period and the actual compliance requirements. let's see. If Daniel Nix, if your system removed lead service lines before the original LCR 30 plus years ago and cannot find the locational records, how will that impact galvanized line designations moving into the LCR? This is a fantastic question. We have asked if there is any sort of statute of limitations on that ever before, and are still awaiting guidance. So if we were to obtain that guidance, we'll be more than happy to share it down to you guys. At this moment in time, if you have any record that you had lead in the area previously, then based on the very open reading of the line definition that Laura read with you earlier, it would probably still have to count as being downstream. Dyer, I saw you had your hand up. Would you like to share something?
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, Dyer Schlitzkis. I'm a third-party consultant with LJ Engineering, and my question pertains to documentation, like draft documentation during this transition period. As I work with about 200 or plus systems, this is going to be a major effort for me to compile all this data for those systems and multiple clients. And I know we're talking about committing or discussing and creating a subcommittee. TCEQ has to hire and create departments to manage this program over the next 3 years. But is there any timeline on draft, the revised rule, draft documents, for example, tiering protocol, and as well as the inventory? I'm just looking to get the information in my hands as soon as possible so I can start working on multiple systems.
Understood. So there are certain things, and Lily's going to give a presentation later about the inventory itself, and it will pretty clearly tell you some items that are base minimum federal requirements that are highly unlikely to change based on EPA's presentation that the inventory is moving forward with little, if any, change. So definitely tune into that once, and I'll try not to answer it all right here, right now. But we are currently developing what we hope are forms to assist you with that. But like I said, the best thing to do moving forward is to listen to Lily's presentation later today and find those core minimum rule requirements and ensure you are meeting those. There are some nice to haves. There are some things we'd like to see, but really those rule minimums are highly unlikely to change because they are set in federal rule, and they EPA have indicated they're unlikely to touch inventory with the lead and copper rule improvements.
Right.
I think the last one I see before we can probably get started on continuing with this presentation is, when do you expect to get the LCRI from EPA? Well, that's a great question. The only thing that they have said in the Federal Register is that they intend to have the LCRI out prior to the compliance deadline, which is October of 2024. So literally any time between then and now is whenever they have committed themselves to producing that. We have no better information than that. So, William, I'm sorry, but that's the best we have at this point in time. Sometime between now and October of 2024. All right. Well, hopefully we're up to date, and if not, feel free. If we didn't get to answering what you wanted, or I potentially missed your question, I'll mark this spot, and then we'll pick up here later. If Laura, you'd like to continue with your presentation?
Sure. And I might just be touching on some of the stuff we just covered, but yeah, let's move on and talk next steps. So water systems must comply with the previous LCR as codified in the July 1st, 2020 CFR and as currently written in the Texas Administrative Code until the LCRR compliance date of October 16th of 2024. So just as we said before, we're going to keep working with this current LCR rule until we get to October 16th of 2024. It's also important to note that this October 16th, 2024 date is the deadline to turn in all of the lead service line inventories. So put that on your calendar and listen for Lily's presentation after mine. She'll talk more about inventories, but that October 16th, 2024 is the deadline to turn in the inventories. And also, just as we've said, like you, we're still anticipating more guidance from the EPA. Once we have more information, we'll be developing and issuing additional resources to aid public water systems. So as we get more information, we'll be passing that on to you guys as well. And then finally, as we also just touched on, once the LCRI is proposed, the TCEQ will work to codify the rule requirements, and EPA intends to promulgate the LCRI prior to October 16th of 2024. Okay, so this slide just illustrates the timeline, because I'm sure it's been confusing, but just to go over the timeline, so the final lead and copper rule revisions were published in January 15th of 2021. And then the Presidential Executive Order 13990 that was to review the rules, including the LCRR, was on January 20th of 2021. Then from the spring to the fall of 2021, EPA was reviewing the LCRR and conducting extensive public engagements. And then in June 16th of 2021, the final LCRR was republished without changes with an effective date of December 16th of 2021. And then on December 16th of 2021, EPA announced that there would be no changes to the LCRR and also announced the inception of the new LCRI. So in early 2022, EPA is expected to provide more information on the LCRI. In summer of 2024, we should expect the publication of the LCRI. And of course, October 16th, 2024, that is the compliance date for the LCRR. All right, so we've discussed the timeline and next steps. So let's now talk about what you as a water system can be working on right now. So firstly, you can just set yourself up for success with the LCRR by complying with the current lead and copper rule. I would tell all water systems, if you don't do this already, strengthen the relationship with your laboratory, become familiar with Drinking Water Watch, and if you have any questions, don't guess. Just please reach out to us. We are here to help. Many systems are issued monitoring and reporting violations that could easily have been avoided. But unfortunately, a lot of systems don't realize that something went wrong until they get that violation letter. So if your system struggles to stay in compliance with the current lead and copper rule, then I don't know, I hate to say it, but unfortunately the compliance requirements for the LCRR are not going to get any easier. However, I know that all of you attending today are already on the right track because you're seeking out information, you're trying to stay informed of the latest updates, and I encourage you all to keep that up. As Stephen mentioned earlier, sign up for the courtesy reminder system, keep attending meetings, keep in touch. These are all habits that'll ensure that you are successful when it comes time to comply with the LCRR in 2024. Secondly, you can start work on your lead service line inventory. More specifics on how to do this are going to be included in the inventory presentation to come, but the LCRR outlines some minimum requirements for the inventories, so you can get started on that while we're waiting for further guidance. Additionally, knowing that the end goal is to get the lead out, now is a great time to work to get ahead of the game. So once your system has a sense of its service line inventory, then you'll have a better sense of what funding options may be available to you. I recommend checking out EPA's website and some other federal websites to determine what grants and programs may be available to your public water system. So HUD, USDA, and TWDB all have grants that could work for you. And finally, if your system is already on the corrosion control pathway due to an ALE, source corrosivity identified by a plan and technical review, or simultaneous compliance issues, then your system should keep moving forward and working towards optimization so that you can increase your chances of compliance with the LCRR when that compliance date comes. Just here is another slide. These are some additional resources. Here's some of the EPA, the links from the EPA, in case you'd like to do some further reading. And then finally, here is my contact information along with the email address for the Lead and Copper Rule Program. And with that, I'll open it up for any more questions if we have any.
Thank you, Laura. I did see that Dwyer has his hand up, and also that I'm assuming it's related to the question in the chat. Does anyone know why the October 16th, 2024 date was determined to be the compliance date? For lack of a better word, it's because whenever the EPA published the rule, then they have a rule mandated basically waiting period before something goes into effect. And then because of the administrative order requiring the review, that review placed it on a formal pause in the Federal Register and once again delayed it by a certain specific period of time. And so now, based on the delays that were built in by the rule process and the delay, that's how we get to the October 16th, 2024 date. It's not significant in any other way beyond that. I hope that answered your question, Dwyer. If not, I see your hand still up, so you're more than welcome to chime in.
Yes, it's kind of two-pronged. The reason I ask, because if I understand it correctly, we could sample up to and report until October 15th under the current regulations. The tiering protocol and sampling, that falls right in the middle of the 6-month period. So any information coming in on October 16th or thereafter until the end of the year, you would then be required by law to re-tier the district and sample according to the new Lcrr protocols and turn in that information based on the new regulations and the effective date. So I guess I'm foreseeing major problems or issues with the data, the way it's collected, the sampling protocol for the 6M period of 2024.
Laura, did you want to talk about that?
So the sampling requirements, so we will, although we're going to go, the compliance deadline is October 16th of 2024. We're going to start with 6-month 1 of 2025 for the new sampling. So if you were scheduled for 6-month 2 of 2024, you won't be held until to the Lcrr until 2025.
Okay, great. That would be helpful to note, I guess, somewhere in the TAC or the guidance forthcoming.
Sure.
Just as a general rule, we do not hold you to a rule that was not in effect at the time at the beginning of your monitoring period, but that's, you know, like I said, general rule. It will not go into the Texas Administrative Code because an effective date is an effective date, but policy and implementation, like you said, could go into guidance, so we can address that in the future. Laura, David asks, is a PWS allowed to do exploratory lead and copper sampling at residences that are not currently in their Lcrr sampling plan as part of their efforts to get prepared for the October 24 compliance date? If so, will the results need to be included in the PWS's current P90 calculation?
I would say yes, you can take any sample that you want for exploratory purposes that, you know, if they're not for compliance samples that, you know, we don't necessarily need to get that data. But also if you're, you know, I think we'll touch on this in the inventory presentation to come, but if we kind of are recommending to folks that to, you know, if you have some unknowns, that if you don't know what your materials for your service lines are, if there are construction projects or other maintenance things happening within your system, that maybe you could, instead of having to go pothole specifically to find out what the lead line or what the service lines are made of, you could, you know, see if someone else is doing construction in the area and kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone in that way. Any kind of work that you can be doing to kind of chip away at getting a better sense of your system before that compliance date in 2024, I think will be absolutely beneficial to you. I think I touched on this a little bit, but, you know, anyone who is identifying in that initial inventory that your service lines are unknown will kind of be held to the same standard as folks who are identifying service lines as lead. So there'll be a lot of work for folks who are saying that they're unknown. So use this time wisely, find out what your service lines are made of, and you've got the time to do it now before you're held to that new rule.
One thing I would just want to chime in is be communicative with the lab that you are using. Ensure that they know that these are investigatory and non-compliant samples.
Yes.
Those, as long as they are marked properly as non-compliant samples, they will not count towards your 90th percentile calculation.
Yes, good, excellent point, Michelle. Thank you.
Stacy went on to ask 2 questions. Are unknowns considered to be lead service lines according to the LCRR? And then 2, are schools built after 2014 exempt according to the LCRR?
So there is a slight distinction. I mean, there are 4 different categories. We'll get into this with the inventory. Unknown is a separate category from lead service lines, but in other regards, they are going to be they'll be treated very similarly. So if the material is unknown, then it's almost as if it could be lead, and so therefore the LCRR takes a more conservative approach that if you can't confirm that it's lead free, then there's a lot of expectations that you will provide public notice, submit replacement plans as if there was lead.
For lack of a better word, Stacy, they assume the worst. You're going to have to do all the work associated to it as if it were lead until you know better.
And then are schools built after 2014 exempt according to the LCRR? As it is currently written, no, they are not exempt. Again, we'll see if the LCRI changes any of that language, but in the LCRR, no, there is no exemption for schools after 2014.
Okay, the next one was from Alfonso. Would you please go over school and daycare sampling timeline again?
Sure. So, so after the compliance due date or the compliance deadline of October 16th of 2024, so coming into 2025, so schools and child care facilities will have to sample 20% of the schools in their community system annually until they get over a 5-year period, until they get all the schools in their district. So 20% every year until you get all your schools over 5 years. Did I answer that question appropriately?
I hope so. So basically, Alfonso, this is going to go 2025 to approximately 2030, and you should be done with that first 5-year compliance period.
Yeah.
Joya Shri Sarka, if you could kind of give me a little more information about how will this rule be interpreted with school districts. The rule does not speak to districts at all. Districts are a state creation. It speaks specifically to the school or the child care. So if I misinterpreted that, please let me know. But it's not at a district level at all. It's each unique school and each unique child care facility. Saws is asking, are predictive models encouraged? That is a great question. It is a question we have also elevated. So when we know better, you will know better. Obviously, we do like the idea of using predictive models to know where to test. So you could always predict that this is the area of town where you might have lead and then do a program of potholing, do a program of record review, do 5th liter sampling. There are other things you can do beyond just the predictive model, but yes, it's highly encouraged to use whatever information you have to look in the right places. Mr. Munn, does TCEQ expect to ask for any deadlines extension as part of your primacy application, or you intend to enforce the deadlines as currently listed in the LCRR? Regardless of whether we do an extension or not, the deadlines are the deadlines. The federal rule is in effect whether we have a state rule or not. Therefore, the compliance deadline you see is the compliance deadline you get. As for primacy, that is still up for discussion. because we are not knowing what the LCRI has in entail for us. We do need to keep our eyes open for that and make primacy decisions based on that. And then Gary asked, did the exception for schools built after 2014 change?
Oh, I don't think so, Gary. Let me look at that again. Maybe I missed something in my reading of the rule, and if I did, I would be happy to make an update on that.
Okay, thanks, Laura. I
Sure.
thought there was, but maybe it changed in the new.
We did a whole lot of reading as of December 16th, so if I missed it, my apologies, but I'll make a correction if I missed something there.
Thank you, Laura.
City of Deer Park asked if schools
Laura,
are Sorry, go ahead.
So Laura, I think the confusion is the school testing requirements. So like which systems are required, or community systems are required to do 20% of the system or of the schools. And I think there's a caveat in there that if it's built after 2014. So if they're not, it's not that they're not required to do the lead and copper rule, but it's the samplings. I think that's where the disconnect
Okay.
is, just for your reference.
Well, let me look it up, and if I can include a citation, I will put that in the chat.
Okay, and City of Deer Park was asking if schools are tested at a rate higher than 20% per year, does testing have to continue through all 5 years? We'll definitely be interested in EPA's guidance related to this, but based on how the rule is written, we think that the compliance period will be, you have to meet a minimum of 20% per year with a end goal of 100% within 5 years. And therefore, the speed at which you accomplish that is not necessarily, you won't necessarily get penalized for finishing early. Right. Laura, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's my understanding as well, Michelle. So we'll see if there's any more guidance to come, but that's how I read it right now.
Okay, I'm not seeing any hands, and I think we've addressed what's in the chat. So thank you very much, Laura. Laura obviously will be here, and she is available every day. So feel free to reach out or continue to add in the chat as things move forward. But knowing that this presentation is concluded, let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break, and we'll come back with Lillian Johnson's presentation related to the first steps, specifically working on service line inventories. So thank you guys for your attention. I know it's been a long time. If you can stand up and walk around for a little bit, we'll be back in 5. All right, folks. I hope that you were able to grab yourself a cup of coffee or a new glass of water, stretch your legs just a little bit. Thank you very much for hopefully turning back around. And for those of you who weren't paying attention or don't have the chat up on your screen, Laura was able actually to provide the citation. And yes, Gary was correct. Community water systems that have a school built after January 1st of 2014 due to the lead ban will not need to participate in having that sampling done at the school. And bear in mind, this is based on the school itself, not on the water system as a whole. So without further ado, thank you very much for joining back in with us. And our next presentation is with Miss Lily Johnson that you see there on the screen. And she will be talking to us about priority number 1, lead service line inventories. So without further ado, take it away.
All right, good morning, everybody. Let me share my screen. Okay, can everybody see my screen okay?
Not yet. I'll let you know when it comes up.
All right.
I have it.
All right. Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Lillian Johnson. I'm a compliance officer for the Lead and Copper Monitoring Program here in the Drinking Water Standards section. There's already been a lot of discussion and participation, which is fantastic. So I'm confident we can have a spirited discussion today on the lead service line inventory. So today I'd like for us to have a discussion on the lead and copper rule revisions and the first steps that you can take as a public water system to prepare for the Lcrr compliance. I'm going to open up the floor for discussion and questions several times throughout this presentation. So I'm hoping that we can participate and have a productive meeting. So this morning, I'm going to quickly review the main elements of the Lcrr, and then we will discuss the material survey and the certification form and the lead service line inventory that is required under the Lcrr. We'll spend some time discussing what you need to be focusing on and preparing for right now to ensure compliance with the Lcrr in 2024. And like I mentioned, I'm going to open up the floor for discussion, so please feel free to put your comments, questions, suggestions in the comment box or raise your hand to speak to the entire work group. Okay, so some Lcrr key changes.
Lily, hold on 1 second.
Sure.
I have a message from Steven saying that they can't hear anything, so I see that from San Antonio as well. I'm not having any trouble hearing, but if maybe you could mute yourself, unmute yourself, and try resharing, yeah, maybe people will be able to hear.
Sure. How's that? Can everybody hear me now?
Looks like we're getting some in the affirmative, so hopefully we're good to go.
Okay, let's try this again. Okay. Thank you, Michelle. But yeah, please let me know if my volume is still not working. So, like I said, we will discuss the Lcrr key changes are listed here. As we've discussed, there's a lot to digest in the new rule, and we're going to have multiple presentations, workshops, webinars to prepare for each of these elements in the Lcrr. But today, we are only going to focus on the material certification form, which will support the lead service line inventory. And these elements are really the building blocks and the foundation for your compliance with Lcrr. The EPA's release of the lead and copper rule improvements of the Lcri will strengthen and expand on some of the key elements of the rule, such as the lead service line replacement, compliance sampling, action and trigger levels, and prioritizing historically underserved communities. So as Laura discussed, the Lcrr effective date was December 16th, 2021. Water systems must continue to comply with the current lead and copper rule as it is currently written in the Texas Administrative Code until the compliance date of Lcrr, which is October 16th, 2024. We will discuss the research and development of the material survey and certification form and the service line inventory. Both of those will be due as soon as practical, but no later than October 16th, 2024. Forms, guidance documents, and instructions for these two forms will be provided as we get additional guidance from EPA. So before we dive into the inventory, I wanted to go over some definitions that we need to be familiar with. I know Laura went over these, a couple of them, but we're just going to hit on them one more time. The lead service line means a portion of pipe that is made of lead, which connects the water system to the building inlet. A lead service line may be owned by the water system or owned by the property owner or both. A galvanized service line means iron or steel piping that has been dipped in zinc to prevent corrosion or rusting. And galvanized requiring replacement is defined as a galvanized service line that is or was at any time downstream of a lead service line or is currently downstream of a lead status unknown service line. If the water system is unable to demonstrate that the galvanized service line was never downstream of a lead service line, it must be presumed that there was an upstream lead service line. So gooseneck, pigtails, or connectors are short sections of piping, typically not exceeding 2 feet, which can be bent and used for connections between rigid service piping. For purposes of this subpart, lead goosenecks, pigtails, and connectors are not considered to be a part of the lead service line, but may be required to be replaced pursuant to 141.84C. And lastly, the lead status unknown service line means a service line that has not been demonstrated to meet or not meet the SDWA section 1417 definition of lead-free. It's not necessary to physically verify the material composition, for example, copper or plastic, of a service line for its lead status to be identified. So you can use records demonstrating the service line was installed after a municipal, state, or federal lead ban. For this purposes, we're using that 2014 lead-free date. So I'll pause here quickly to see if there's any questions or if anything was unclear on these definitions or we'd like to discuss more. We got any questions in the chat?
Nothing so far, but I'll keep an eye on it.
All right, so I'll move ahead.
Oh, sorry, we just had one come in. What is defined as proof? Great question, not defined in the rule. And we are asking for EPA guidance on exactly what is acceptable from, potentially a statistical model, what's acceptable from a scratch test, what would be sufficient to actually check the box of being verified and demonstrated. So that is something that is not clearly defined in the rule and that we are seeking feedback on. So once again, this is another one of those, when we know, we'll let you know. But for now, the best, go till you feel confident and keep track potentially of how you got to that level of confidence. And as guidance comes in, you'll know whether that's sufficient under the rule. Sorry, Lily, we also have a hand up. Sorry, Gary, what do you have, sir?
Oh, thanks, Michelle. So I just wanted to, hi, Lily. I just wanted to, I think it's really important we just make sure, because terminology is going to be really critical. So when we're talking about lead service lines, I mean, Lily's going over this again right now, but then Laura presented a slide earlier with a longer definition. But I mean, those are something we can take to the bank, right? This is what we're defining as a lead service line, as opposed to a galvanized service line or a connector. Lead service line means from the main to the building inlet. I think, I want to just make sure we're all on the same page with that.
Yes, I believe we are all on the same page with that based on the feedback that EPA's rule people have given us. They believe that inventory is a set portion of the rule. And because these definitions are such an integral part of those categories they're requiring in the inventory, these are what we're going off of. And these might be the shorter version, but that really long version that you saw of lead service line in Laura's presentation, we can take those to the bank as far as these are the categories we're intending to use, and we're trying to understand these as best as possible. And like you said, yes, they are saying from the main to the building. So that includes everything in the ground. And we'll talk about later about how to best represent this and whether it applies in different areas. But yes, as far as we're concerned, that's the whole shebang, and that's what we're planning to move forward on. And these are the definitions of record. Also, the San Antonio's water system came in for clarification, up to what year of home construction do we need to inventory service line material? 2014. The lead ban, which less than 2.5% of wetted area can contain leads, or can contain lead of less than 0.25%, went into effect in 2014. So buildings that are actually constructed using that lead ban, that 2014 lead ban, is when you'd be able to put that into effect. David asked, I thought that the connector, i.e. pigtail, was not considered as part of the service line. Please confirm. So yes, the pigtail is part of the service line, but the pigtail containing lead in and of itself is not sufficient to make that whole service line meet the definition of lead service line. Is that correct, Lily, based on your reading as well?
Yes, that's my interpretation as well.
And Regina asked, what is the definition of building inlet? And what is it the customer meter? No, unless the meter is at the home, that is not the building inlet. It is where the water enters the building. So, you know, up north, we'll show you a picture here in a little bit. Some places the meter is actually in people's basements. So that's the building inlet. And in that case, yes, it is the meter. But here in Texas, a lot of meters are sitting out at the curb. So no, the meter is not the building inlet. The building inlet is where that water goes into the home or apartment complex and becomes residential plumbing. And okay, we'll follow up on the PowerPoint slides later. Sorry, Lily, go right. Oh, I'm sorry. We also have one more hand up. Oh, Alex, what would you like to add?
Well, good morning, Lily and Michelle. I appreciate it. So I guess in terms of the lead-free designation with the date of, the year of 2014, I would assume that we would allow them to go back to 1988 when we had the initial lead ban. Granted, I know some of the amounts were lessened significantly, but would y'all mind addressing that?
Lily, did you want to?
No, you go ahead.
Okay, so for the purposes of the lead and copper rule revision, the EPA is pretty clear that to meet the definition of lead free, it has to be 2014. If you look in the rule on the tiering structure, there is a lesser tier associated to things installed basically after what would have been our 1988 lead ban, where we're looking at more copper and potentially low leaded solder. But there is a tier for that is not lead free. So it's a lesser risk, but there's still a risk associated based on the way this rule is currently written. I hope that addresses your question.
Yeah, so if you're just trying to go by construction date, you got to go by 2014 is what you're saying. And 1988 is somewhat irrelevant.
From the perspective of lead, non-lead, yes. But later when it comes to tiering, that could help you, sorry, excuse me, determine the actual, which one of the lesser risk related tiers beyond 1 and 2, which are lead specific. So it's still important, but from a lead-free perspective, 2014 is our year.
Okay, so if you're trying to use construction records to put together a lead service line inventory, can they go back to 1988 or do they have to use 2014? I guess that's my question, just in terms of the inventory.
In terms of the inventory, they kind of like we talked earlier about statistical analysis. It can tell you where your higher risk areas are, but you'd still need to confirm and check. So I think that Craig will talk about this a little more later, but yes, from the perspective of just being able to say 2014 or later, you can, without much more verification, actually without any additional verification, you can mark it as non-lead, you can do that. For anything from 1988 to 2014, you're still going to have to go in and check to make sure, because the fixtures could have contained lead. There's too many other things that could have contained lead beyond the actual plumbing.
Hopefully we addressed all those questions regarding the 2014 date. I'm going to move on to this image that was provided by the Government Accountability Office that shows key features of the drinking water service line. Please note the delineation between public and private service lines here. And I want to take a break here to discuss what feedback you all may have on how we can better develop a picture that is more representative of what we actually see in Texas. Thankfully, I was able to find an image here that didn't have a water meter in the basement, but I'll open up some questions. What differences could we see in urban, suburban, or rural service lines? Is this meter location accurate? Are we seeing more meters at the curb stop? And are we seeing service lines serving multiple homes or buildings? And I'll open up the floor for discussion. We're going to work with our team to, like I said, develop a better representative image for what we see in Texas. So we'll likely address this in future presentations as well.
Sorry, Lily, one question that came up real quick from Saws was, will there be a sampling option, i.e. something like 10 liter in lieu of potholing to determine potential plumbing materials from the main to the home? Will this be something the subcommittee will discuss? I think that is something that we will definitely need to be discussing in subcommittee. It's also something that's been put forth to the EPA requesting additional guidance. So between those two, we should get to what the textured standard is. And then Bill did add in that most meters in Garland are at the curb. The photo looks like a gas meter. Yes, I agree. It definitely looks like a gas meter. But I also wanted to say, you know, I agree. I worked in a mid-sized city, and we typically had our meters right there just beyond the corporation stop. And in theory, you know, we said, you know, your responsibility is outside of that, closer to the main. Your responsibility as a home leader is between this point and your home. Just to clarify, that's not what the lead and copper revisions say. This says that all the way until that pipe disappears into their home, it is your responsibility to know what it's made of. So I want to see what we can do to better draw that. So I would suggest the diagram having it at the curb, similar to what I'm seeing in the discussion here. Now, what I would like to ask is anyone who represents rural areas, I am not very familiar with what's going on in rural locations. So if you have any opinion on what looks more like what you see in your rural area, I'd be very interested. And if you are listening and we put out the survey for the subcommittee, anyone who can bring a rural voice into this, or even a super urban, mostly apartment voice into this, we'd be very interested in the feedback you have so that we can develop something that looks right for Texas, and preferably looks right for all of Texas, not just the suburbs. All right, I'll go ahead and stop there. Thank you, Lily.
All right, thank you, Michelle. Okay. All right, so now we are going to move into the discussion on the material survey and certification form. This is the form that's really going to set you up for your lead service line inventory. First, I'll go over the Code of Federal Regulations, the 141.84 citation that outlines the requirements for lead service line inventories and material categorization. So inventories must include all service lines connected to the public water system, regardless of ownership status, and must be categorized in the following manner. And that is lead, galvanized requiring replacement, which as a reminder is the galvanized service line which is or was downstream of a lead or lead status unknown. The lead status unknown categorization, where there is no documented evidence supporting material categorization or classification. And non-lead. And this categorization is where the service line is determined through an evidence-based record, method, or technique not to be lead or galvanized requiring replacements. And as Michelle mentioned, as we get additional guidance from EPA on what that actual proof is, we will absolutely let you know. So who is required to submit this material survey and certification form? All community and non-transient non-community water systems will submit the material survey and certification form to the TCEQ. These are all public water systems that are currently regulated under the Lcr. This form should be submitted as soon as practical, but no later than October 16th, 2024. This form is required once for non-lead systems. And for all others, the form is going to be required annually or triennially, depending on their sampling schedule. For community systems, the material survey and certification form is required in the system's consumer confidence report as well. The first CCR regulated under LCRR will be July 2025. Okay, so what could this material survey and certification form include? This form is being developed right now and will be made available to the public as soon as we can. For the time being, I'd like to start the conversation on how you foresee approaching this requirement and the hangups that might come up. We would like this form to include a record review checklist that identifies what records were used to determine service line materials. The federal CFR does require that the public water system review all available sources of information that would detail the material of the service lines. I'm going to go into this more on the next slide. The TCEQ would also like to see a service line material table that will quantify the number of service lines connected to the distribution system by the 4 material categories. The category table would also require the delineation between public and private ownership in the line count. As a forewarning, and as we mentioned previously, the lead status unknown categorization is going to be treated similarly to the lead and the galvanized requiring replacement service lines. So really right now, water systems should attempt to confirm the material of all service lines connected to the distribution system as soon as practical. The more you know now, the less work you will need to do in the future for inventories and replacement plans. So as I discussed previously, this material survey will be the foundation of your lead service line inventory. And lastly, a certification of completion will be required that a water system representative certify under penalty of law that all information is true and correct. So I really want to hit now that the cooperation among all parties associated to the public water system is required to complete this form accurately. So here are the federal requirements for the LCRR and the sources of information that all public water systems need to review. The federal CFR requires that public water systems review these sources of information: all construction and plumbing codes, permits, and existing records, all water system records including distribution maps, drawings, historical records on each service connection, meter installation, historical capital improvement projects or master plans, and any standard operating procedures. In addition, all inspections and records of inspections of the distribution system are required to be reviewed as well. So these are the sources of information that you can gather right now for review in preparation of this material survey requirement and in preparation for the lead service line inventory. So now I'd like to take a break and open up the floor again for discussion. Here's some questions on the slides just to get this discussion going. What challenges do you foresee in preparing the material survey? Are these records that are required by federal rule available to your PWS? What records do you have? Does anybody have any suggestions or success stories?
Okay, folks, I know we have quite a few things here in the chat, and we'll get to those, but I would like you to potentially, if you have any responses to the questions that Lily put out here, feel free to just unmute yourself and provide any feedback you may have. David Munn, looks like you're first up if you would like to chime in.
Sure. You know, we've been working with cities to collect the data that Lily just showed in her previous slide. And it's really been a mixed bag for each municipality. Some have more data than others. Some have one sort of data, whereas another may have, you know, tap cards. Another one may have more inspection forms. But, you know, we have yet to find a client that has all of that. And so I guess a question would be, you know, when we say, or when the rule says that those data sets are required to be considered, I would interpret that to mean that we're required to look for them. And if they're not available, then we could note as such and move on. Could you comment on that at all?
Yes, that's my interpretation. And Michelle, please chime in. But yes, my interpretation is that the CFR is requiring that the public water system look for those records and review if available. But if they're not there, then they're not there.
Right. I would just chime on that we're not asking you to generate any documents you do not already have. We're only asking you to look for what you have and making the best determinations you can based on those. Mary, I see you had your hand up. If you'd like to chime in with some info.
Well, I just had a question. So do we still have to go through looking for all these records if our way of doing this has been to go into every meter box and document material on either side of the meter?
That is a great question. I feel like if you have firsthand documentation, that's better than trying to use a secondary source of documentation. Obviously, we have to be as stringent as the federal rule, but I think that that's something that you know, is definitely worth a discussion. I definitely feel like if you have firsthand knowledge, that's going to trump any of the other documents you might be able to find. Stacy, did you have something similar to say or ask?
No, I was going to chime in on what Mary said. And I guess one of our success stories, because we started doing this in 2014, 2016, I'm sorry. And what we did find is when we have any main breaks or leaks, that we were actually documenting that prior to that process as well. So any time you're in the system and trying to do any maintenance, that may be a way to start documenting some of that information when you talk about success stories.
Definitely. And another thing that they indicated is also, you know, in the rule, when you find lead from this point forward, you should go ahead and change that out. And technically that doesn't exist until the compliance date, but if you find it now, you might as well get ahead of the game and start doing those types of things too. Bill, did you have something to add on as well?
Yeah, I'm always stuck on the, you know, the private side line, because I know at my house I had a leak on the my service line, and the plumber fixed it, but he didn't fix it all the way into the house. So I know by my meter it would be non-lead, but and if we just look at the meter, it's going to show that. But I mean, if the intent, how are they looking at it and going to say, well, how do you know it's all the way to the building if it's just at the meter, that it's just one continuous line? That's going to be, you know, a concern that I have.
Definitely. I know that we've discussed that with people where they're like, oh, well, we just looked at the meter and this side shows that, but you have no idea exactly what has made it all the way to the home. It's possible that building permits would show that you replaced 20 feet of line, and if the line's 60 feet, you know, there's something questionable there. But, you know, that is really getting in the weeds. So I agree that that will be something that we have to overcome moving forward. And is a very good question. There were some things already in the chat if I don't see any more additional hands. So let me go ahead and try and hit some of those before we move on. Okay, I think the first place to pick up was Caroline Russell was asking about the 1988 lead ban. And I want to kind of clarify. So because the 4 categories available are lead service line, galvanized requiring replacement, non-lead, and what's sorry, Lily, what's the third one?
Let's see. So
Lead unknown.
Galvanized. Yes. Yeah. Lead, galvanized requiring replacement, lead status unknown, and non-lead.
Okay, so the reasoning behind not just blatantly accepting the 1988 date is even though galvanized wasn't typically used in service lines after the 60s, it was sometimes used in household plumbing. So it's possible they could fall into that galvanized requiring replacement if there was a lead service line upstream. So that's why there's a little bit more digging for after when you just find that 1988 date. But if you have a 1988 date that's copper or PVC based on the plumbing code or the building requirements for the time, then you know, more power to you. And I feel like that gets you into that known non-lead category. But you do have to do that one next step just to make sure, because there is a possibility it could be a galvanized downstream of lead, which would be in the requirement, the replacement requirement category. We did have the question about if the material survey is available. The answer is no. We are currently working on it, and we're very interested in what you have to say, which is why we ask here, like, what can you find? What can't you find? How would you like to report this to us? Any feedback you have is the kind of thing that we'll try to make that form work for you as well as it works for us. I did mention to here on Gary asked for the due date on that material survey. It's the compliance date, just like the inventory, so October the 16th of 2024. And that's something that we can definitely take up in the stakeholder group. Will the LSI, oh, is that the lead and copper rule improvements? Elaborate on what is considered proof of verification. I have no idea what will be included in the lead and copper rule improvements, but hopefully it will be covered in EPA guidance. Okay, so anybody else have information on the material survey discussion before Lily moves on with her presentation? Is the LSI inventory requirement up to the building inlet? Yes, because the definition of lead service line is from the main to the building inlet, and you need to account for all portions of the line, both utility owned and private side owned, you would need to check. Yes. Okay, that is our last question. Sorry, Lily, go right ahead.
No problem. Thank you so much. Okay, y'all, so now we're going to move on to the lead service line inventory form. First, we'll discuss who is required to submit this form. So all systems that identify lead service lines, galvanized requiring replacements, or lead status unknown service lines on their material survey and certification form must also submit the service line inventory form to the TCEQ. So service line inventory should be submitted as soon as practical, but no later than the Lcrr compliance date of October 16th, 2024, the same date that the material survey and certification form is due. Lead service line inventories will be required to be submitted to the TCEQ annually or triennially in accordance with the system's TAP sampling schedule. For community systems, inventories must be included in the Consumer Confidence Report, and I will touch on that later in this presentation. So here are the federal requirements as written in CFR 141.84. And I want to talk through the practicalities of these federal requirements. I'm going to read the citations as they are written, but I've summarized them here on my screen on the presentation. So the inventory must include all service lines connected to the water distribution system, regardless of ownership. Where ownership is shared, the inventory would include both the portion of the service line owned by the water system and the customer-owned portion of the service line. A water system must use any information on lead and galvanized iron or steel that has identified pursuant to 141.42D when conducting the inventory of service lines in the distribution system. The water system must also review the sources of information that I mentioned previously to identify service line materials for the initial inventory. The water system may use other sources of information not listed below if approved by the state. Each service line or a portion of the service line where ownership is split must be categorized and delineated in those 4 categories that I mentioned previously. So water systems shall identify and track service line materials in the inventory as they are encountered in the course of normal operations. So as mentioned previously, if you are if you're reading water meters, if you're performing maintenance activities, you should be checking the material of that service line that's being worked on. Systems must update the inventory based on all applicable sources and submit an updated inventory in accordance with TAP sampling, but no more than annually. So what could the service line inventory include? Like the material survey, this form is being developed right now and will be made available to the public as soon as we can. We all have the unique opportunity right now to discuss elements of the inventory and how you, the stakeholders, anticipate the inventory coming together. We'd like to discuss what format may be most useful to you. Guidance documents and instructions will accompany this requirement as we get additional guidance from the EPA. So I'll talk a little bit more and then we'll have a discussion. But from the CFR, We know that the water systems must identify, track, and categorize all service lines in distribution. The material survey and inventory are the very first steps for the ultimate goal of lead service line replacement plans and getting the lead out. Replacement plans will be required in the coming years, and it's best for you to set yourself up right now in preparation. All of this to say, for tracking purposes and to assist with future replacement plans, TCEQ would like to see street addresses, including street name, number, city, and zip code associated with each service line in the inventory. Federal rule allows for a second identifier, such as an account number or a meter number. We'd like to discuss if this is something that you want and would be helpful to you. So, like I said, I'll open it up for discussion in just a moment. In accordance with CFR 141.84A4, we need to know the service line material or if it is unknown. Additional information that may need to be presented in this inventory are the set service line installation date and the source of verification that you use to confirm the service line material. So here's what TCEQ is proposing as some of the elements of the inventory. I'll open up the floor for discussion now and maybe ask these questions to yourself. Do these inventory requirements work for you? Where wouldn't this work for you? What type of format would be most beneficial, efficient, and accessible for you? Either an Excel form, an online Google form, a map, etc. So please feel free to put your comments, suggestions, questions in the chat or raise your hand to discuss to the work group.
Charlie, I did see you note that rural systems may not have an address for all services. I concur that that may be the case. Do you have any idea what could potentially work in a rural setting?
Michelle, I don't know that I'm the one that, since I have not really worked in a rural system, I know of them, and I've been, looked at quite a few of them in my regulatory days. But I think somebody who's more on the rural side can give you a better idea. Maybe that's, I think you have, I forget the exact things you had on there, but an account number don't require maybe one or the other, but not specifically have an address. But somebody that Water Supply Corporation, some of the rural systems give you a better answer. That's where the stakeholder group can really input here. And that's my comment. Maybe some others here would have a better comment than I do.
Okay, agreed, and thank you. I will definitely try to do what we can to recruit people of multiple backgrounds and multiple water system types to the stakeholder groups that hopefully we can get their input on this. I'm seeing in quite a few places that account numbers change. And we'd rather not use those, and that makes verifiable sense. We are just trying to find out what else that secondary identifier could be that could help you guys out. GPS coordinates, instead of an address, I do agree that that is more permanent, and I believe that that is an option. Not everybody has the capability of providing that, so we'd have to look at how that could be done. Question came from G. Would TCEQ consider self-testing and reporting by public being one of the tools for inventory? So Lily, I think that you have this in here later about involving your customers, and it is possible that they lived in their house for 20 years. They know exactly what's in the piping, and I believe if Houston's on the line, I think they've tried to get their public involved, trying to get more information from them. So yes, I think that just like I believe she goes on later to discuss talking to your personnel, talking to your customers is also an important option for the inventory. Have any professional plumbing associations been contacted to help develop these inventories? That's a great question. We have not currently done that. Never would have thought of it either. So great question, Saz. We may have to touch base with you to see who those plumbing associations might be, and about potentially getting somebody to help us out on the stakeholder groups that's well represented. Yeah, and GPS coordinates. Okay. I do believe we had somebody with their hand up though, so let me give them an opportunity. Oh, Stacy, go ahead and have an opportunity to speak.
Yes, I was just going to say, one of the things we ran into in Fort Worth is that we found out some of our meter locations were on different streets or had a different address than the house address. So that's something people may want to be aware of as they work through their inventory. Especially if the house is on a corner, the meter may be coming in from another street and the house address is on a different street.
May I ask how you addressed that in your inventory?
So we're working with our customer service group to combine that information and make it one address. So if that means changing the meter address to the house address, that's what we're working through. We just had a few that were like that, but that did come up in our inventory.
Thank you. Mary, did you have something to add on to that?
Yeah, because we're also getting those GPS coordinates for every one of these. So that's really where we're going to know where the meter is for that location. It's based on that GPS coordinate, but also careful using account number. I can't remember what's in the state law on confidentiality of customer information. So that might be something just to think about too, because there is a state law regarding what info is confidential.
Thank you. Good to know. We'll have we'll have the lawyers look into that to make sure we're not asking for anything we shouldn't have. I didn't see much on here except for some people asking for Excel, and I wanted to ask, because Excel generally requires a Microsoft software license, is that something that would make this inaccessible to smaller systems? If we did have an online form that was Google Sheets or something that is Excel equivalent, or where you can cut and paste from Excel, would that meet the needs of those who prefer to work in Excel? I'd be very interested to hear what you guys have to say about that. Stacy, did you have your hand up, or is this from before?
It's from before, but I do have a comment. If the utility can make this information available, because I think it says if you're 10,000 customers or more, you have to make it available to the public. If we have all this information available, then is that something TCEQ would be willing to go, if we make that link available to TCEQ, so we're not double dutying that process, or would you like to see something separate? I guess that would be my question.
Chances are we're going to need it actually submitted to us, because we'll also need to be able to have the actual control of that data so that we can report to the EPA as required by our primacy requirements. So it's not just the fact that it is out there in public so much as it's public at the national level for their occurrence data and all those kind of reporting requirements. Karen Michelle, I saw you pop up and off, or did you have anything to add?
Yeah. And y'all, I just want to make sure that you understand, we're going to need these addresses so that we can track in the event that you're going to have replacements. I do think that portion of the rule is going to be kind of amended and modified, just because, what we're hearing is we don't think the Biden administration thinks the replacement is going far enough and quick enough. And so once you guys get those inventories into us and your replacement plans, we're going to have to track those addresses where you've identified whether it's unknown or the lead service line, so that we can get that out of there. Now we'll check on the law in terms of what addresses are what, but there's nothing specifically in the federal requirement about putting addresses out there. And frankly, I think that they're moving towards a more transparent mechanism, so that people are understanding and they're aware of where the service lines are. Yes, that became a problem after Flint for us, and we had taken those sites off where we had identified lead service lines at those addresses, because we had a lot of media people and a lot of property owners and everybody getting very upset because we had addresses out there. And so as a courtesy, we kind of removed those, kept them internally, so that you didn't have media showing up at the door going, you have a lead service line, and you potentially be in a Flint situation. And that was going on. That's how crazy that got after Flint happened. And so, you know, if we need to go back to that because EPA is demanding some transparency so that customers are aware of where these service lines are located, it's either going to be, you know, through us or through y'all. And so, you know, these identifiers are going to be pretty tricky because, you know, the expectation is that you're also, you know, providing customers that information to where they're located. And you've got to be able to do that. We'll certainly look at, you know, any state laws and see if we have some confliction there. But I think the norm is going to be a transparency here, and we can sit and talk about that a little bit more, but we might not have a whole lot of choices. Did anybody else have any questions about that? I just wanted to tell you how we were feeling about that.
Okay. Thank you, Carrie Michelle. I guess we're up to speed on the chat and the hand raising. So Lily, if you'd like to proceed.
All right, awesome. Yeah, a lot of good participation. I'm sure, you know, that stakeholder subcommittee, we can talk a lot more about this. Okay, so I'm going to move into the lead service line inventory sources of information. Again, this was discussed previously, but just as a reminder, these are the documents that you can collect right now to prepare for your material survey and your lead service line inventory. So again, construction and plumbing codes, permits, engineering plans, inspection records, the distribution system maps, meter installation and service connection records, any existing capital improvement projects and master plans. So there may be, you know, some current projects that are going on in your public water system right now that you could combine to get some information on the service line materials. So like I said previously, working across departments to utilize all available resources will be very beneficial for your public water system. You can interview senior personnel or retirees to brainstorm. Contact your county clerks or appraisal offices for construction dates. Review permits and inspection records. And finally, you could conduct a physical survey and an investigation of the service lines. We do have our engineer Craig on the line to answer any questions regarding the physical inspection of lead service lines. So if you'll have any questions regarding that, we can open that up for discussion now. Here's a picture of potholing, which, as you may know, is an investigative construction method whereby the location of underground utilities is exposed. Physically inspecting the piping by digging and revealing the service line could show you a lead service line. Lead is a dull gray color and it's very soft. If scraped with a key or a coin, the lead service line will turn a bright silver color, and even a strong magnet will not stick to lead. So what current planned or proposed maintenance projects are there at your public water system that are going on right now that you can use to also identify the material of the water service line? You can combine projects, dig a hole only once, work smarter, not harder. Any questions regarding the physical inspection of service lines at this point? I imagine we will have a subcommittee solely for this discussion as well. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go through the lead service line inventories reporting requirements. The inventories are required to be made available to the public and for systems that serve more than 50,000 people. The inventory must be available online. For community systems, instructions to access the service line inventory must be included in the yearly consumer confidence report. And again, I think this is going to be another point of discussion that we need to delve deeper into in a subcommittee. Right now, are there any questions or practicality issues regarding these inventory reporting requirements that y'all would like to discuss? Okay.
Lily, I saw some questions about potholing and proof, and I just kind of want to basically discuss those in a bigger issue that the rule as written in the CFR says there are these things, and I think it's paragraphs like A through G that you have to look at.
Yes.
And that you need to show that you've looked at. And each of those is a facet. Doing one alone isn't actually meeting the rule requirement. So each of those is a piece of proof to build a case. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have a singular smoking gun that tells you the answer. Same thing with potholing. We're going to have to wait on EPA guidance to say, okay, is potholing at the meter and then potholing at the building inlet, and confirming they're both the same type of material, is that sufficient? Is only looking once sufficient? That is not something that we have an answer to at this point in time. So we'll have to wait and hear what that says. And then William asked if there is a mapping requirement. Currently, as written, there is not actually a mapping requirement. Obviously, that could be a great way to communicate with your public. It could be a great way for you to, include this with your GIS understanding of your water system. So it's a great opportunity, but it's not a requirement. You will not have to deliver a map to us, which is why we need that locational information. I did not see anything that led me to believe there were actually questions about the reporting that Lily just asked about, but I did want to just kind of put it out there, people, that, it's a lot of goal number 2 is transparency and empowering the customer. So this is a lot of what goes along with goal number 2 is not just having the inventory, but making sure people know if they are potentially affected. And not only are you going to have to present this inventory, but also if it's a lead service line, a galvanizer requiring replacement, or even an unknown, you'll have to be making sure to reach out to those people on, I believe, an annual basis. So the more potentially the less people you have to reach out to, lower, you know how it went whenever consumer confidence reports were able to be posted online. You were able to cut your postage significantly down. So I encourage you to know the most you can so that your reporting requirements are limited and useful. We want consumer confidence to be as high as possible. And the more you know, and the more they understand that you know about the system, the more confident they are in you running that system. So back to you, Lily.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. Okay, so I know we hit on this previously, and we had a good discussion on the dates regarding the lead service line inventory, but let's go over them again. Beginning in June 1986, the Safe Drinking Water Act prohibited the use of any pipe or plumbing fixture or fitting, any solder or any flux in installation or repair of a PWS that was not lead-free. Texas adopted this lead reduction in 1988, but effective January 4th, 2014, lead-free was amended to no more than 0.2% lead content with respect to solder or flux, and a weighted average of 0.25% lead content with respect to all wetted surfaces of pipes, pipe fittings, plumbing fixtures, and fittings. For the purposes of the survey and the inventory, we will use the 2014 date against the service line installation date as proof of service line material. The rule does not accept a construction date of 1989 to 2013 as proof of non-lead. Like Michelle mentioned, it's not a one and done. We need verification, but again, this will be discussed in depth in subcommittees as well. So that was a lot. Where do we start? How can we identify lead service lines? Maybe you want to first identify all non-lead service lines, but here's some ideas on how to identify the lead service lines in your public water system. Determine if any service lines were installed before 2014. Again, as lead-free was redefined by the EPA in 2014, this is the date that we will accept as lead-free. Determine if any short pieces of pipes, including goosenecks or pigtails, were used to connect the water mains to customer service lines. Lead pipes were typically installed in smaller service line diameters, so you can identify service lines that are 2 inches or less in diameter. There are rare reports of lead service lines that were installed up to 3 inches in diameter, so please be aware of that as well. You can also physically inspect the pipe. As we discussed earlier, you can dig and reveal the service line, do a scratch test, and that will let you know if that is a lead service line. So here's an example of how a community public water system could identify service line materials on the map. You can see the dots for each service line identify both the public and the private service line material, and they're identified by a color, green, white, or gray. Okay, so we're coming up to the end of my presentation. Here are some questions to consider as you are developing your material survey and certification form. Are departments of revenue, building inspection, and planning offices prepared to support your inventory development? How can community groups and health departments support your development of the material survey and inventory? Are residents aware of how to identify lead service lines and how to communicate that to the water system? How can you get your community and customers involved in this process? How does this inventory connect with similar inventories and other projects that are ongoing in your public water system? And lastly, I'd like to discuss anything else that is unclear. I know we discussed many things that we, the TCEQ, can ask EPA for guidance on. I think we're going to do that throughout the next, 2 years. Is there anything else that we would like to discuss at this point?
Lily, I did see a question here from Saws about when the public outreach and PR campaigns begin. Is it now or after the compliance date? And I want to put it out to you, that is up to you. Knowledge is power. If you want the knowledge now, you can start your public outreach immediately. You can start asking them to help you find out what their service lines are made of. There is nothing holding you back. However, the need to actually get that information and report it to us is not until that compliance date. So that's up to you and how you choose. And if you are talking about the required public notification of people who have lead service lines or have, galvanized requiring replacement or lead status unknown, those are compliance requirements. So those are not something that would go into effect until the compliance deadline. However, like I said, knowledge is power, and people are generally slow unless you force them. So the earlier you start, and the more you have knowns, the more you can concentrate on the unknowns that hopefully are getting smaller and smaller. And you might be able to get more, if not all of your unknowns addressed prior to the compliance date. And of course, that means that your tiering will be correct. That means that your replacement plan will be based on actual replacement requireds, not a whole bunch of unknowns that are going to jack your numbers up into a much higher replacement requirement. So it can benefit you and your program in so many ways. And not only that, but that kind of segues into that next question. What about the funding program? Well, we personally at the TCEQ will not have a funding program. However, the EPA has identified several funding options that you can actually see in the Federal Register that were published out there. So feel free to check them out. They, I believe that Laura mentioned, and maybe Lily, as you did as well, but Housing and Urban Development has some funding that could be associated, community development block grants that could be useful. There's also those that are more rural areas have USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, and then TDA, Texas Department of Agricultural funding that they may be applicable to. And obviously, if you can prove a need and apply sooner rather than later, your funding would probably come through sooner rather than later. So that's why I say, be proactive. Nothing you do here, especially since the #1 goal of the lead LCRR is to get the lead out. Nothing you do that removes lead would be something that is going against what the rule wants or won't potentially benefit you in the long run. So I'd like to put that out there. And then the next question on here is, one issue we are considering is the legal issues that we would have if we have to pothole or dig up the private sideline. We are not legally allowed to do work on the private side of the line due to ordinances and damage to the property. So yes, there have been many, many questions related to private-public requirements. However, there are, people who have set precedents in other states about having the need to understand and know that information, and they've accomplished it through customer service agreements, ordinances, and other items that allow that information to be obtained. And then, of course, the rule is based on the fact that it needs to be accomplished, whether you're paying for it or whether they're paying for it or whether they're doing it and you're doing it and you just coordinate, it still needs done. So if that means you coordinate with the private side person to find out what theirs is, and then you coordinate with the private side person to have their plumber come out at the same time your utility crew goes out, you'll have to find the means to the required end, which is compliance and removal of both sides of the line and identification of both sides of the line. David Munn had, will there be a deadline for eliminating all unknowns from inventory? Lily, the way I read it, currently there is not a deadline, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so obviously the goal is to get you there, and especially if you were to ever trigger the need to go down your replacement plan, every single unknown adds to the amount of lines you'd have to replace every year. So in the end, you would eventually need to get all those unknowns either replaced, which would be a big waste if they weren't a lead service line, or identified. So, obviously the sooner the better. Requirement of utilities to supply water filter cartridges, maintaining public confidence after that. Okay, great question. So we didn't really delve into that much because it is a portion of the rule that we have been signaled by EPA's responses that may be modified under the lead and copper rule improvements. So because it is not as set in stone, we are not concentrating on that part of the rule currently. As far as maintaining public confidence, I feel like the sampling and consistent communication, building up a public relations and public outreach from this point forward is only going to benefit your system. So being as transparent as possible typically has a positive impact on your public confidence and public image. Any indication when TCEQ would release a template and guideline on the material survey and certification form and service line inventory? Great question. Lily, we have high hopes, but bear in mind that we want to make sure that they are forms that work for y'all. And they're also forms that work for the EPA required rule minimums. So I would highly encourage anyone who is interested to participate in our stakeholder or subcommittee groups to be able to make sure that your input and feedback is included in those forms. And the best I can say is that they will be made available as soon as practical. We're not going to put out something that we're going to have to revise and you guys will have to backtrack and redo. That is not our goal. We try not to put additional work on you. And so our intent would be to avoid that at all costs, which means that we'd like to get it to you sooner rather than later. But that's also partially why we're discussing with you today what the absolute minimums are. If you know that the rule requires that you check out these 7 pieces of data, then that will not change. No matter what form you're certifying it on, you'll need to look at those 7 pieces of data, for example. Or if you're doing an inventory and it has to go into one of those 4 categories, you know that you need to provide us with these basic, identifying features and then a line determination. So those are the things that are set forth in rule. You know those minimums. You can start working on those minimums, and the format in which we get it from you can happen down the line. Saz asks, if we find a line and offer a replacement to a homeowner, how long do we have to wait for a response from the homeowner? I believe that Lily or Laura might need to chime in. I believe that generally speaking, you're given 180 days. You're able to coordinate with them for 180 days, or they should respond to you within 180 days. But that I might need to respond back, review the rule to be sure about that. Now, bear in mind, Saz, that a partial lead service line replacement where you do your side and they do not do their side will not count as a replacement under the rule. Therefore, if you do not hear from a homeowner, it's best to keep checking back and try to do a coordinated one regardless of the timeline, so that you actually replace both sides as intended by the rule. You might be able to prioritize those people who are responsive versus those that are not. But once again, that's the implementation. It's further down the line, and we may be hearing some changes under the Lead and Copper Rule Improvements Act that could potentially change that. So I don't want to say anything particularly definitive other than coordination is key, and I know cooperation is difficult. So the most we can communicate upfront now, the better. Lily had quite a few questions specifically over here for you guys to consider, so I'm going to be quiet for a few minutes and give you guys a chance to specifically reply to those or to raise your hand to discuss them. Okay, perpetuated silence. We'll go ahead and, oh, sorry, one hand up. Cool. David, if you'd like to chime in.
You know, there's the question of, are departments of revenue prepared to support the inventory development? You guys kind of probably got the feeling that there's a lot of interest in this question of whether or not we allow the lead-free rule to be, you know, based on 1988 versus 2014. We're already seeing cities kind of struggle to find the funds to do the field service exploration necessary to identify unknowns. Back when we thought that 1988 was going to be the line in the sand, if we're moving that to 2014, that's probably going to have an impact of several hundreds of millions of dollars across the state to accommodate the additional field testing that'll be necessary. So it just wanted to provide some context as to why you guys were getting so many questions and making sure that we got that exactly right.
Understood. And I do want to reiterate that just because something was built between 1988 and 2014 doesn't mean you need to field verify. If you have a building code from that time period that does not allow galvanized, then that means you cannot have a galvanized downstream of lead. So there are plenty of documentation ways to get to a 1988 to 2014 installation falling into the non-lead category. If the building permit pulled for that shows copper, shows PVC, there's no need to go out and pothole or ground truth. So I do want people to take a deep breath and remember that, you know, paperwork is paperwork. And most people hate paperwork, but in this case, paperwork could really help us out. It could really help us know that we don't need to go out and dig a hole in 20,000 places. So anything you can find out through paperwork, through records, through ordinances, through plumbing code, those would be hugely important. And as much as you can do through record review up front to reduce the field work would be highly recommended. Just, you know, knowing when I was trying to figure out how I would approach this if I was a water system, going onto the county appraisal district and being able to see that some of them actually include what the plumbing material is, and GALV is galvanized. So if you can work with your, you know, county appraisal district and that's information that they have, you could potentially get yourself pretty far down the road without having to dig holes. So that's why I tell you early and often, like right now and from this point forward, you're going to hear from me every time you talk or every time you see me probably, is to do as much as you can from a record review standpoint before you go out and spend the money on people digging holes. I understand sometimes it can't be avoided, but to reduce that to, you know, not just all hands on deck, go out, dig holes, see what you can do by avoiding that in the first place. You know, it's a hope. I don't know how practical it's going to be in reality, which is part of why we want to hear feedback from you guys, whether you are able to find these records and whether you know, if you think you found what you would call proof, if you think that I know this date was 1989 and this plumbing permit says copper, or our building ordinance in the city at that time did not allow for galvanized, I think that we can have discussions about the ability to check that non-lead box, obviously pending EPA guidance, but anything you can do to avoid that unnecessary digging would be hugely beneficial.
And Michelle, I apologize for being pedantic on this, but if we do the research and find an old plumbing code that says, hey, in 1990, this city adopted a plumbing code that does not allow lead, that is not sufficient because the definition of lead at that time may not be the same as the definition of lead in 2014. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. So at that point in time, you'd be looking to make sure that it was installed with non-lead line, so particularly not galvanized, because at that point in time, galvanized could still be downstream of an existing lead service line, and it would fall into that category. So really, at that point in time, you're not working to make sure that it's not a lead service line, because it's not going to be a lead service line from the perspective of it actually being made of lead, but it could be galvanized, which would then be downstream potentially of a lead service line and fall into that third category. So that's what that teasing part would be. Now, if the plumbing ordinance indicates that galvanized is not allowed, because the Texas ban on lead was 1988. So if your 1990 building code said that residential plumbing cannot be galvanized, then you would be covered by that potentially. I see another chat here. I may have missed the answer to this question. Will these slides be available at a later date on TCEQ site? So this whole presentation and the one before it and the one after it will be available on the YouTube site. So you should be able to see these at any time at your convenience, as long as you have an internet connection. Anything else to add? Because if not, we're running a little bit behind, and I want to make sure Letty has a chance to talk to you guys about the Senate Bill 3.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. And my apologies for those of you who are tuning in for Senate Bill EPP stuff. We'll make sure to get you the content you need. So, Letty, if you are ready and available, I'll go ahead and pass it to you.
Thanks, Michelle. This is Letty. I'm just going to go over some quick items that we have noticed on the EPPs that we have been receiving. And so it's a list of items that are often either missing or not addressed in the EPPs that are coming in. So one of the first things is to circle the options. Whatever options you choose for your EPP, make sure that you circle each one of them and that you actually complete the section that's associated with that option. We've received a few where they circled the option, but when we go to the pages, they're blank. So after reviewing the information, we're like, I think they meant this option and this other option. So just verify that you're circling the options that match up with the sections of the EPP that you're completing. Whoever completes the EPP, please make sure that you sign it and date it. And that's like at the bottom of the first page. Please include a diagram of your water system when submitting your EPP. It can be an attachment if your system is small enough, and we've had people who submit very large attachments, and then we've had people who draw very nice, neat little diagrams. We just need to know your plant equipment, the flow of the water, any pressure planes if you have them, and how many connections serve each pressure plane, and what chemicals you're using at your water plant. It helps us get a good visual when we go back and we read the sections that you have completed under your options to verify whether or not you included the chemical pumps, that they'll be operated by a generator if that is the option you've chosen, to verify which booster pumps are going to be functioning under the option that you've chosen. So please make sure you include a diagram of your water system. When completing your EPP, please make sure the addresses for your wells, service pumps, any of your tanks and chemical pumping equipment actually match with the names of the water plants on your diagrams. Sometimes we look at the diagram and what has been listed in the plant doesn't match anything. We're at a loss as to, well, which one are they discussing? And so many times you will get calls from our EPP reviewers, just to ask additional questions and to get clarifications to make sure that we're understanding what you entered. Texas Drinking Water Watch is a great resource for your water plant information. We do recommend that you go into Texas Drinking Water Watch. If you don't know what the link is, if you go to any search engine, if you use Google or Yahoo and you just type in Texas DWW, the first link that comes up is for Texas Drinking Water Watch. And the wonderful thing about this is that it'll show you all your plants and the activity status of your water plants. We've noticed that sometimes there's discrepancies. A water system will include a plant that in Drinking Water Watch, we either have it listed as inactive or we have the wells listed as plugged. So it's also a great time for you to spend a few minutes to verify that the information in there is accurate. If you will be relying on a wholesaler, if you're a purchased water only system and you're going to be relying on your wholesaler, please make sure you provide us with a copy of the contract or a letter where the wholesaler is supporting that they're going to be providing you water under emergency conditions. If there are a number of tanks and pumps that you do not intend to use during an emergency, you can always provide that information under question 9, section 1. And all that is for question 9 is it asks specifically if, excuse me, other pertinent system information. So anything that you want us to know about your system, let's say you have 4 water plants and you only intend to use 2 of them during an emergency, you can state in there, plants numbers 4, 5, and 6 will not be utilized under this scenario. And that stops all the questions. We don't have to be following up on things where we're not sure what you're going to be doing. So, and if you think that section is too short, you are welcome to submit as many attachments as you deem necessary to convey the information to us. If you feel that a section of the EPP doesn't adequately address something you're trying to include, you are welcome to send us the attachments that addresses or provides additional information. We will accept it and we'll review anything you submit. So please work with us if we give you any calls for any type of clarification. We are happy to reach out to you. We might be running a little bit slow because there are some days when we get a lot of calls and the questions are, they require quite a bit of digging. If you need any type, if you're interested in assistance in completing your EPP, our financial, managerial, and technical assistance team is available. They will help you complete an EPP for free. They will also, if you feel that you qualify for a waiver, they will help you with putting together the information for a waiver. For FMT assistance, you do not have to meet directly with a person. They can assist you via visit, email, or phone. They will contact you, they'll make an appointment with you, and whatever you're comfortable with, they will assist you. Let's see. We also have, we've had multiple workshops. They were put on by our FMT team as well as small business. And one of the workshops that was recently held earlier in January, no, I think it was the tail end of December. It was held in Georgetown. So that one, all of the information that was provided during that specific workshop will be posted on the YouTube site, and we will be sending out the links so you all can watch it at your pace. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to us and we're happy to assist you. Do you all have any other questions? I'm sorry I kind of raced through that, but due to a short period of time, let me see if there's a question concerning Drinking Water Watch website and updating in the future to make it user-friendly and easier to navigate. I would leave that to
Letty, I can try and field that. Yeah, in the approach to improve the greater database, which we use, which is the Safe Drinking Water Information System, there is also a push to update Drinking Water Watch to coincide with that. So it is in plans at the larger federal level, and we'll have to wait to see if it trickles down to us. But yes, that need has been discussed, and hopefully we're moving that way.
Okay, are there any other questions? Well, thank you, and I'll
Letty, I just saw one in the chat.
Okay. I can't. My chat is not.
Oh, sorry, Letty. On sections that do not pertain to the system, can the section be deleted in the plan template?
Only if you promise that everything will still match up. You're welcome to leave whole sections blank. You can even put a watermark through the page that says NA on it. We have had several that do that. You can try, but if we can't follow through your plan and the information doesn't match, we will be calling you to make sure that we understand what it is that you've submitted. Next question.
Thank you, Letty. That's the only question I'm currently seeing. My apologies for giving such limited time. I know that a lot of people need to be putting these in. Okay, sorry, one second. Gary Chauvin asked, Letty, I'm sorry, can you please repeat what you said about a video?
So we had a workshop in Georgetown, and it was completely recorded, and we will be posting it, and we will send you the links. So if you want to watch the workshop, you're welcome to do that.
Thank you very much.
Letty, it's Alex real quick. And that was the one that TRWA and TCEQ, y'all put together, because small business did some. We recorded ours and posted it on our YouTube site also. So there's kind of two different webinars that were out there.
Alex, just send me the link and we'll post both of them so they can choose which one they want to watch, or if they want to watch both of them.
Will do.
Thanks.
Thank you all very much for attending today. We greatly appreciate it. I hope that discussion was helpful, if nothing else, trying to see where things are going and how we can get there. If you do not currently obtain the DWAWG information through the DWAWG email blast that we do, and you'd like to be included, especially on the upcoming surveys about a stakeholder group, please feel free to email us at DWAWG, DWAWG, at tceq.texas.gov. We'll have you added to that list and make sure you're included on future correspondence. Thank you all very much, and we look forward to seeing you again in the April quarterly meeting. Have a good day.